LoveLore Library. Chapter 204. Wait, what's going on? Yuan Ming, who was originally peacefully staying in the Xuanhuan space, felt as if his blood vessels were being summoned by something. It was surging and almost manifesting his primordial spirit. He forcefully suppressed his demonic nature and coughed heavily. Woman, move closer to the Buddha statue. Hellion Vivian frowned. What's wrong with you? Knowing Yuan Ming for so long, she had never seen him like this. I always feel that something is wrong. Yuan Ming narrowed his eyes. After waiting until Wei Wei shifted her position, that restlessness unexpectedly disappeared. His expression, which was filled with doubt, sank, bringing out a silence that was different from the past. Hellion Wei Wei didn't have the opportunity to ask Yuan Ming again, because when she shifted, she happened to be behind a certain highness. She didn't even lift her head and bumped into that tall and straight, slightly cold back, as hard as a rock. She wanted to say sorry, but obviously, the people around didn't think it was an accident, and had begun to despise her with the eyes of a love-struck fool. Hellion Vivian simply didn't even say sorry, met the man's indifferent eyes, smiled, and wanted to retreat. Unexpectedly, the other side opened his mouth, and there was no fluctuation in the tone, and the tone was cold. Don't move anymore. When the young ladies heard this, they looked at each other and more or less understood. His Highness was tired of her, otherwise, with His Highness's temperament, how could he speak at this time? It was obvious that he saw through her boring tricks and warned her. Hellion Vivian hummed, and there was nothing to care about standing there. The main thing was that Yuan Xiaoming couldn't wake up again. What was going on? Bailey Jiaju looked at the person standing behind him. She had a fierce expression on her face, and he didn't know what she was thinking about. He suddenly had an urge to reach out and pinch her. Perhaps he wanted to test how thick her skin was. However, this person was the most pleasing to the eye when she stood behind him. Beligaju hooked up his lips and a smile flashed through his eyes quickly, so that no one could catch it. Hellion Vivian was still fantasizing about shaking Yuan Xiaoming, and she didn't notice the attitude of the royal family. The two of them were clearly standing one in front of the other, but they didn't give off a distant feeling. Perhaps it was because Beligaju's face was slightly tilted to the side. When the sun shone down, it seemed to soften the lines of his jawline, and even his thin lips were glowing. Eunuch's son watched from the side and more or less understood the situation. He stood to the left to make space for the two of them, deliberately separating Hellion Jiao from them. Hellion Jiao now hated Hellion Vivian so much that her teeth itched, but she couldn't say anything to Eunuch Sunday. She could only stand there awkwardly. It seemed that they were close, but in fact, there was a person between them. This made her plan to take the opportunity to get close to Beligaju disappear. Hellion Vivian saw that she couldn't wake Yuan Xiaoming up, so she didn't insist. She just wondered what he said before he fell asleep. When she came back to her senses, she saw that Beligaju was looking at her. Hellion Vivian didn't understand the meaning of the royal family. She raised her eyebrows. You suddenly bumped into me. Do you think this royal highness can understand that you are throwing yourself at me? His voice was very low. Hellion Vivian wanted to say that all this was a coincidence, but there was no way to explain why she could bump into the back of the third prince in just 2 steps. She felt that her reputation was ruined by the hands of Yuan Xiaoming, a burden. Your Royal Highness, you think too much. Hellion Vivian smiled, bright eyes and white teeth, the taste of sunshine. Bailey Jiaju's eyes turned cold. Is that so? Yes. Hellion Vivian was afraid that he would misunderstand, so she thought for a moment and added, I really don't have a crush on you. After hearing this, Beligaju suddenly curved his thin lips. That kind of smile was too devilish, so bright that only Hellion Vivian could see it. There were even stubble of ice in his eyes, as bright as gemstones. Inexplicably, Hellion Vivian felt that she had said something wrong. The meaning was very simple. It was to say that the clouds and mist had dispersed, and the sweetness had come after the bitterness. It was even to the extent of showing off one's ability, which was very much in line with Hellion Vivian's situation. The second stick, however, made head abbot Fong Zhang stare blankly, because what was written on it was none other than the sentence he had just said, "Isn't a golden carp a fish in a pond?" Encountering wind and cloud, it transforms into a dragon. Although at the beginning, he had indeed given Hellion Vivian this kind of evaluation. But generally speaking, when a woman was looking for a stick, it was very rare for her to get this kind of divination. This was simply the best of the best. Head Abbot Fong Zhang had no choice but to start sizing up Hellion Vivian again, more or less having some doubts. According to reason, with the rumor of a genius reincarnated Phoenix Girl, she shouldn't have gotten a better stick than Phoenix Girl. In the end, what had gone wrong here? Look at Abbot Fong Zhang, what's wrong with him? A sharp-eyed person saw Head Abbot Fong Zhang's hesitation. The young master fanning himself guessed, could it be that the second stick's words aren't good? Sometimes, even if it was the best stick, it still had to be explained by the words of the two sticks. It wasn't that this kind of situation hadn't been encountered when looking for a stick. For example, the first stick's words were very good, but if the second stick's words just happened to clash with it, then even if the two sticks were the best, the result wouldn't be very good. This was the magic of divination. Therefore, what the second stick's words were was very important to the divination. Everyone observed Head Abbot Fong Zhang's expression and lightly laughed. It seems that someone is going to be happy for nothing. Let's wait until the divination is solved first. When Hellion Jiao Air heard that there was a change in the divination, the smile on her face rose again. She just said, how could an ugly woman who'd run out of luck every time be able to get a better divination than her? However, when Head Abbot Fong Zhang read out the words of the stick word by word, her face instantly sank. This sentence basically didn't need Head Abbot Fong Zhang to explain, everyone could understand. It was because they understood too well that they looked at Hellion Vivian with disbelieving eyes. Before, when Head Abbot Fong Zhang said it, they didn't completely believe it. After all, a woman who was expelled from her family, no matter what, could she still flip the heavens? Now that they looked at this stick, for the first time, they began to look at Hellion Vivian seriously. But they didn't know that it was already too late for them to look at her seriously. Because they wouldn't have thought that the trash that they thought had just climbed out of the quagmire had already become Profound Heaven's boss. Moreover, her martial chi had already reached level 8, far higher than Hellion Jiao by several levels. The mysterious expert that made the four great clans constantly think about and want to rope in, was her. Chapter 205. After praying for marriage, it's time to fulfill the last wish. The imperial family doesn't need to perform a big ceremony like ordinary families to offer incense. Retired emperor only took 3 sticks and bowed towards the main Buddha. He didn't kneel, let alone kowtow. Abbot Fong Zhang escorted him all the way down the forest road. Probably because he's still thinking about the wooden lot just now, Abbot Fong Zhang's face clearly showed a bit of absent-mindedness. Retired emperor left him behind and let the young ladies of each aristocratic family enter their respective carriages first. What do you think of this Hellion Vivian? Retired emperor and Abbot Fong Zhang walked to the edge of the forest. Looking at that distant figure, they hesitantly opened their mouth. Abbot Fong Zhang lowered his eyes, respectfully with a bit of worry. This old monk feels that she's a bit similar to that servant girl by His Highness' side. Probably because it's been too long, this old monk can't say for sure. Retired emperor's eyes sank. You're saying that he chose Hellion Vivian because of that servant girl? This old monk can't answer you, retired emperor. Because this old monk isn't His Highness, I can't be sure what His Highness is thinking. Abbot Fong Zhang's voice also slowly lowered. Perhaps he's just purely interested. Retired Emperor clenched his hands. If Ju doesn't get Hellion Vivian, what will happen to him? Perhaps one day, that servant girl comes back. What will happen to Hellion Vivian? He will. I think you know, Retired Emperor. Regarding that servant girl's existence, it's impossible for His Highness not to be aware. Even if he doesn't know now, someone will think of a way to let him know. When that time comes, this old monk can't predict what kind of situation it will become. Head Abbot Feng Zhang paused for a bit, then said again. Didn't you say that it's very possible that His Highness has already recovered his qi? Since that's the case, I think, according to his habits, once he has a proper master, he wouldn't want a substitute. What's more, even now, you and I still haven't figured out what kind of attitude he's holding towards this substitute. Perhaps it's just like what you said at the beginning, that he's only using Wei Wei. When the retired emperor heard this, he pondered for a moment. Then, he looked back and said, anyone is fine, but only that servant girl. I will never allow her to get close to Ju. She is a disaster to the imperial family. Back then, I should have tried my best to kill her. Now, everything will be fine. Amitabha. Head Abbot Feng Zhang clasped his hands together. He didn't like to talk about killing. The retired emperor steadied his thoughts. When he opened his mouth again, he was as calm and wise as usual. Then, let him obtain Hellion Vivian for him before he knows that the servant girl has returned. Head Abbot Feng Zhang furrowed his brows. Isn't this a bit too unfair to Hellion Vivian? Obviously, she was only a substitute. No, perhaps it was more appropriate to say that she was a rake. The retired emperor was still pushing her into the fire pit. The retired emperor didn't speak. Head Abbot Feng Zhang knew that this was a decision that he had already made. The imperial family had always been ruthless. Especially those who had reached a high position, even more so. The retired emperor met his line of sight, as if he was making a promise. When the time comes, if she really can't change Ju, I will let her withdraw without a single mistake. Head Abbot Feng Zhang was astonished. The retired emperor believes that the Hellion family's girl can change His Highness. Let's take a gamble. The retired emperor looked at the figure not far away. Ju isn't the kind of person who will lose his head for anyone. What those elders thought of may not necessarily be effective on him, but I have to leave him with something to think about. Head Abbot Feng Zhang stared blankly. He suddenly felt that his body was somewhat cold. The retired emperor put it nicely as a thought, but in reality, if His Highness always kept that maid's shadow in his heart. Then as far as Hellion Vivian was concerned, no matter how well she lived, she was still only a substitute. Even if one day, His Highness personally killed that maid, it would still be the same. It was just a pity that such a good stick was lost. According to reason, the person who was able to draw that wooden stick absolutely wouldn't walk this path in the future. Head Abbot Feng Zhang lifted his eyes again and looked towards a direction not far away. He only hoped that in this game, that unique little girl wouldn't sink too deeply. Amitabha, the retired emperor looked at Head Abbot Feng Zhang's appearance of putting his palms together. He extended his hand to let the accompanying eunuch support him as he walked over. At that moment, he felt that he really was old. If he was still young, he definitely wouldn't take advantage of Hellion Vivian, this little girl. The more he looked at her, the more he felt that this girl's character was good, that she was sensible. However, there was no other way. His grandson needed this kind of person by his side. Even if it was a fire pit, he could only push her in. At this time, after coming out of the temple, Yuan Ming was finally able to speak. However, his voice still sounded unusually weak. He lazily nestled in the Xuanhuan space, looking like he didn't plan to come out for the time being. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. What happened? I also can't say. Yuan Ming thought about what happened just now. I always felt that at that time, there was a very familiar aura. However, when you bumped into that third prince from behind, that aura disappeared. However, the shaking was too big. You have to give this senior a bit of time to recover his strength. Hellion Vivian narrowed her eyes. What aura? I'm not sure yet. Wait until I'm sure, then I'll tell you. I'm going to sleep first. Yuan Ming waved his hand, directly blocking the mental communication. However, he hid something in his heart. He didn't know if it was his misperception. In that instant, he actually felt that man's aura. How was that possible? That man's primordial spirit had already been destroyed. How could he still be in this world? It must be that he thought too much. Yuan Ming yawned and rubbed the small book cover that Hellion Vivian gave him with a big heart. He began to devour the aura and cultivate. When Hellion Vivian saw him like this, she didn't continue to ask more questions. She wouldn't ask a devil to tell her the truth about everything. Lying was a devil's nature. Since Yuan Ming didn't want to say it, she didn't need to get to the bottom of it. It's just that it was very rare to see him like this. This made Wei Wei somewhat unable to figure out what happened just now. Obviously, the inside of the temple appeared to be harmonious. If one had to say something, it would be that third prince appeared to be somewhat unhappy. Hellion Vivian recalled the scene in the temple just now and slightly frowned. Miss Vivian. Just as she was thinking, she suddenly heard someone calling her. When she turned around, she saw a eunuch's son standing behind her. There was hesitation on his face. There is one thing that this slave wants to trouble Miss Vivian to help. Hellion Vivian withdrew her hand from opening the carriage curtain. She smiled faintly. What's the matter? His Royal Highness' hand was injured and the retired emperor offered incense. Until now, he hasn't applied medicine. Eunuch's son said anxiously. When he met Hellion Vivian's eyes, he sighed. His Royal Highness probably forgot, but when he saw the carriage, he gave an order that no one was allowed to approach it. This old slave is worried about His Royal Highness' hands. On such a hot day, will pus form. Chapter 206. It's not to the extent of pus. Hellion Vivian curved her thin lips and helped him out of the predicament. However, if there are scars on His Highness' hands, it will affect their beauty. Should I go with Eunuch's son to take a look? Eunuch's son seemed to have seen his savior. His eyes lit up and he reached out his hand. Eldest miss, follow this old servant to this side. As he spoke, he turned his head and instructed those little eunuchs, you guys go ahead first. If anyone dares to speak of today's matter, be careful of your neck. Hellion Vivian knew that this was to pave the way for her. Fortunately, the Hellion Jower and the others had already left. Otherwise, if they saw Hellion Vivian enter the royal family's carriage, many things would happen. Eunuch's son's words were to help Hellion Vivian avoid these troubles, thereby achieving the goal of protecting Hellion Vivian. After all, if a woman was jealous and did something malicious, it would be hard to guard against. Eunuch's son led Hellion Vivian all the way over. He originally wanted to let him report, but at this time, the retired emperor's carriage was also lifted. He suddenly didn't know what to do. Hellion Vivian naturally saw that he was busy, but she didn't care. I'll go over by myself. Eunuch's son, you can go do your own thing. Then I'll have to trouble Miss Vivian. Eunuch's son turned his head and instructed the little eunuch who was leading the way, then hurriedly walked over to the retired emperor's carriage. The little eunuch probably hadn't been with Eunuch's son for a long time. He didn't even look at Wei Wei's eyes and lowered his head. Miss Wei Wei, His Highness' carriage is over there. Hellion Vivian looked up and saw a carved black wooden carriage not far away. That carriage was very large and didn't have any extra decorations. The carriage roof was carved with floating clouds and was made of the best sandalwood. It was low-key and revealed a sense of luxury that was difficult to hide. "Okay, I got it." Hellion Vivian walked over but was stopped a meter away. That was also a small eunuch who served Bailey Jia Ju the entire way. Seeing that Wei Wei had arrived, the way he spoke didn't carry any trace of politeness. "This young lady, look clearly. Your carriage is over there, not here with His Highness." Hellion Vivian knew that he was doing what he should do. After all, if everyone could get close to the third prince's carriage, then there would be trouble. Just as Hellion Vivian was about to explain the purpose of her visit, a voice suddenly rang out. However, the young eunuch muttered again, "Does he really think that it's so easy to curry favor with His Highness? Not only did he use underhanded means in the Buddhist hall, but now he's trying to curry favor with His Highness. Doesn't he know that His Highness hates this the most? Curry favor." After Wei Wei heard these two words, she sneered and extended her hand to pull him over by the collar. Her tone of voice was neither light nor indifferent. "I was invited by your eunuch's son to apply medicine for His Highness. However, it seems that there's no need for that now." After her words fell, Hellion Vivian turned around and planned to leave. The young eunuch snorted disapprovingly. She was invited by eunuch's son. Who was she trying to fool? Did she think that she was a great beauty? If it was someone like Miss Zhao Er, who had a good family background and good looks, saying these kinds of words would make sense. Look at her face, it was so dark that people didn't dare to compliment her. What's more, in the Buddhist hall, His Highness was already disgusted with this woman. He definitely didn't want her to come close. The young eunuch raised his chin and was immensely pleased with himself. Then, he heard a voice from the carriage without any warmth. It was so cold and indifferent that it made people's scalps go numb. "If she leaves, then use your head in exchange." That voice was very light, but even so, it made the young eunuch so scared that he knelt on the ground in a flash. Third. Royal family, this servant. The young eunuch trembled from head to toe. Beligaju didn't even look at him. This Highness actually didn't know. When did Miss Hellion stick to this Highness? Could it be that no one told you that this Highness doesn't like to be misunderstood? This servant. The young eunuch only felt that he was wronged. He also heard those people say that His Highness loathed this love-struck Hellion Vivian. After all, His Highness had never let any woman receive him like this. But now, it seemed that they'd all guessed His Highness's thoughts wrongly. Beligaju's voice didn't have the slightest undulation. "Shadow, take him away and cut his tongue. Tell those eunuchs that what they shouldn't say, they should all shut their mouths for this Highness. Don't speak carelessly." "Yes." Shadow used some strength and lifted the eunuch up. That young eunuch had long since not dared to open his mouth to speak. His lips were pale and colorless, ugly to look at. Those who wanted to harm others didn't have a good end. Hellion Vivian stood to the side and also didn't make a sound. She only calmly watched. She actually didn't think that the royal family would be so angry. But thinking about it carefully, his methods were originally like this. Perhaps it was precisely because of this kind of iron-blooded method that the four great clans wouldn't act blindly without thinking. "Come up." The voice inside the carriage sounded again. Although it was still as indifferent as before, it didn't have the baleful aura of a moment ago. Hellion Vivian was still thinking about what happened just now and didn't react. Then she heard Beligaju say another sentence. "Could it be that you want this prince to personally go down and carry you up?" Hellion Vivian was taken for granted by his kind of reasoning. In addition, his tone didn't carry the slightest bit of emotion, making her somewhat speechless. Let the royal family carry her up the carriage. Even if eunuch's son had the heart to help her conceal it, it was estimated that within 2 hours, all the students would know about this news. Because that kind of scene really gave off too strong of a feeling of impulse. Hellion Wei Wei even had some doubts, whether or not she would be shot to death by someone's gaze. It seems that you really want this prince to carry you. Hearing this, Hellion Vivian hurriedly said, "You stand there, don't move. I'll go up by myself. Aren't you going to leave?" She didn't know if it was her own misconception, but Hellion Vivian always felt that the three words royal family carried a bit of loneliness. Hellion Vivian's hand that was lifting the curtain paused for a moment. When she actually entered the carriage, she knew that she was wrong. Her so-called loneliness just now was completely because a certain highness had just woken up, causing his voice to be a bit hoarse. It seemed like he still hadn't woken up from his sleep. His eyes were half closed, and his thick eyebrows and dark eyelashes were lowered, reflecting a dark shadow. His ink-like long curly hair draped over his back. Inside, he wore a pure white robe. However, the collar of the robe had been pulled open by him. Large roses were embroidered on the luxurious brocade with silver thread. It was extraordinarily exquisite. Even the cuffs of his sleeves were embroidered with half a lotus. His entire person was elegant to the extreme from inside out. This kind of baligaju lacked the indifferent, holy, and noble appearance that he had in front of others. Instead, he was more languid and deadly sexy. He was half lying on the fur-covered chaise lounge in the carriage, one of his long legs was half bent. Even when she came in, he didn't lift his eyelids. Chapter 207. Hellion Vivian didn't need him to greet her. She rolled up her sleeves and leaned close to look at him. Which hand was it hurt? Baligaju then opened his pair of extremely beautiful eyes and faintly glanced at her. After that, he opened up his left hand. Sure enough, there was a wound in the center of his palm, and there were even beads of blood on it. If Eunuch's son knew that one day, Baligaju could be so cooperative, his eyeballs would definitely fall out of their sockets. The shadows standing outside the carriage also had the same feeling. At the same time, they breathed a sigh of relief, but at the same time, they also felt that it was inconceivable. In their memories, when had His Highness ever been this obedient? It seemed like it had never happened before. He wouldn't even let a woman touch his fingers. Even that person in the past was the same. But ever since this Hellion family's young miss appeared, Master's habits became more and more unfathomable. Thinking of this, the shadows couldn't help but look in the direction of the carriage. Their eyes were filled with admiration for Hellion Vivian. Hellion Vivian didn't know how difficult it was to deal with the royal family normally. Just now, when she was standing in the Buddhist hall, she unexpectedly didn't see the wound on the man's hand at all. It was clear that the royal family wanted to hide something. If he didn't want to, then no one would know. Hellion Vivian looked at that wound. It didn't look like it was caused by a sharp weapon. Rather, it looked like the royal family had crushed something. In the end, who made him so angry? Hellion Vivian swept a glance at the arrangement inside the carriage. She also didn't find any ointment. Instead, there was a handkerchief. However, this kind of wound generally needed to be disinfected. What she was afraid of was that there were some shards stuck inside. Thinking of this, Hellion Vivian stood up. She didn't expect that this kind of action would touch the man's reverse scale. It made him ignore the wound on his hand and directly grab her wrist. His eyes as deep as the cold pool of midnight watched Hellion Vivian attentively. His tone was indifferent. "Where are you going?" The silhouette of the man with a silver mask had an illusory beauty that was otherworldly. Only his pale thin lips gave people a sense of cold asceticism. His pure white clothes had some golden embroidered clouds at this moment, making him look even more noble. Being looked up at by him, Hellion Vivian always felt that in his eyes, she was his whole world. It was probably because he was used to being looked down upon by the royal family. Hellion Vivian told herself that, but she still felt that this royal was more likable. At the very least, she didn't have a venomous tongue. Unexpectedly, Beligaju's next sentence was, "Do you want to go out now and smash someone to death?" It's really rare to bump into someone while walking. Hellion Vivian, other than attacking her intelligence, would the royal family talk to her about anything else? Suddenly, without any warning, Bailey Jiaju forcefully pulled and pressed her into his embrace. His white robe danced in an arc along with his movement. He pinched her chin and then slowly raised it. His pair of eyes were slightly cold. "In the future, stay further away from Heizei. Do you understand?" "What's wrong with Heizei?" Hellion Vivian frowned. She subconsciously thought that he was thinking about the involvement of the four great families. She lowered her eyes and said, "Don't worry, I know what to do. Even if we have a good relationship, there are some things that shouldn't be said, so I won't say it." "So, shouldn't your highness let go of your hand?" Hellion Vivian used her strength and skillfully pressed down on his wrist. She lightly flung it away and then tidied up her clothes. "Your highness, in the future, just say what you want to say. Don't use your hands. In order to avoid misunderstandings, we have to say this properly." With every sentence she said, the man's ink-black eyes became even more gloomy. By the time she finished her last sentence, those ink-black eyes were already suffused with a faint golden light. Beligaju's gaze very slowly swept over Hellion Vivian's body. After that, he slowly said, "You have a good relationship." Hellion Vivian didn't understand why he would ask so much about Heizei. He probably didn't want her to be involved with the four great families. After thinking for a while, she said, "We'll talk about him later. Where's the ointment? Where is it? Didn't you put it in the cubicle last time?" "I threw it away." It was still the same indifferent and slightly cold voice. He said it so confidently. At the same time, Wei Wei couldn't be reasoned with, but at the same time, she also felt that it was indeed Third Prince's style. Whatever he did, it was always based on his own mood. Wei Wei almost suspected that if he wanted to obtain the throne, wouldn't it also be something that could be easily obtained? Unfortunately, the royal family didn't seem to have a very high interest in the throne. It wasn't enough. He just didn't have an interest. He also wouldn't allow other people to steal the power that belonged to the royal family. That's why the four great families were mentally and physically exhausted when they encountered such a prince. They wanted to rope him in, but they didn't have a way to rope him in. They wanted to deal with him, but they were always miserably dealt with. Hellion Vivian shook her head. She extended her finger and poked his palm. Her attitude was very casual, as if she was talking to a partner that she used to do everything with in the past. "I can't not deal with it. I'll go ask them for the ointment and needles." Beligaju raised his eyebrows and looked at her. He didn't let her get up again. Instead, he ordered outside, "Prepare a new set of the things that this highness just threw away and send them in." His voice was very light. It had a magnetic texture, and it couldn't be changed from being cold and luxurious. Hellion Vivian thought in her heart, no wonder all the young ladies in the capital wanted to marry him. This kind of man indeed had the capital to captivate people everywhere. Fortunately, her willpower was relatively strong. Compared to handsome men, she loved money more. The main thing was that a handsome man like the royal family couldn't be bought with money, and it was too dangerous. Therefore, Hellion Vivian could only admire him and didn't have any other thoughts. In less than a minute, the well-trained shadows had prepared a set of all the things that Bailey Jiaju had thrown away in the past according to their original appearance. The carriage also slowly moved forward. When Hellion Vivian took the box of ointment, she smelled it and felt that it was familiar. Her eyebrows raised. "Don't tell me that you just threw a box of Tianshan Snow Lotus." Bailey Jiaju indifferently hummed in agreement. "Hellion Vivian, boss, that's Tianshan Snow Lotus. It wasn't an ordinary flower or plant. Is there a difference? Beligaju looked at her. His tone was steady, without a trace of fluctuation. Helene Vivian was speechless. She always felt that she was very wasteful. In the modern era, she spent a lot of money to buy a basement just to put her guns and toys. Now, compared to a certain highness, she was simply a little expert at saving money. Throwing Tianshan Snow Lotus. Ha! He might as well throw out a chest of silvers. The more Helene Wei Wei came into contact with His Highness, the more she discovered that her Prince Charming's otherworldly nature was mainly manifested in two aspects. One was his unfathomable thoughts and methods that could change the weather with a flip of his hand. The other was that he really was very rich. You're so far away from this highness, how are you going to apply the ointment? Chapter 208. Beligaju's slender and white fingers rested on the short sandalwood table. His emotionless eyes fell on Helene Vivian's body, and his eyebrows raised. Helene Vivian felt that she was close enough. This carriage was the biggest, but there wasn't much space. If she moved a little closer, the two of them would inevitably have physical contact. It's easy to get hurt if you get closer. Helene Vivian turned her face to the side and dipped the needle in the ointment ground from the Tianshan Snow Lotus. She didn't raise her head and said, "It's not good to offend His Highness when the time comes." He seemed to look at her, and his tone was indifferent. "There's nothing bad about it." And Helene Vivian raised her eyebrows and looked into his eyes. She was still wondering if this man's misophobia had been cured. She heard him slowly open his mouth. "Sooner or later, I'll offend you." When he said the word offend, she didn't know if it was intentional or not, but he reached over Helene Vivian and put down the curtain behind her. His voice was neither light nor heavy as it brushed past Helene Vivian's ear. When his breath hit her ear, it always made people feel a little numb. Helene Vivian turned her face to the side and looked at the man's cold eyes. She shifted her position. This man was simply the evildoer of evildoers. If he wanted to bewitch someone in the future, it would be very easy. Helene Vivian raised her head and smiled. She moved closer and naturally held Beligaju's wrist with one hand. She held the silver needle in the other hand and slowly opened the place where it should be broken into pieces. Her whole person gave people a very comfortable feeling. However, she still felt that the two of them were too close to each other. She didn't know if the royal had any complaints about her touching his hand. The whole time, he lowered his eyes to look at her. The sense of presence was too strong, making Helene Vivian wrinkle her eyebrows several times. However, this didn't affect Helene Vivian's treatment of the wound. Her hand didn't even tremble. First, she picked the ointment in his palm. Crush the dregs and apply the ointment directly, then tie it up with a white handkerchief. Done. All right. Helene Vivian stood up. She wanted to stop the carriage so that she could get off. However, Bailey Jia Ju instructed the people outside, "Hurry up, go to the front." Helene Vivian, on the wooden table, the smoke in the mouth of the Chilan incense burner became thinner and thinner. Beligaju opened the lid of the burner and swept a glance at her. "If you go down now, everyone will know that you have boarded my carriage." No, she didn't mean that at all. If others found out, there would be endless trouble. The thing she was most lazy to deal with was trouble. Helene Vivian yawned and was a little sleepy. "Then when can I go down?" Beligaju's beautiful eyes narrowed. She didn't like to stay in the same carriage as him. As if inadvertently, Beligaju threw away the lid in his hand and leaned back with a faint smile. "You can also go." If she moved, he would break her pair of claws, so that he wouldn't be annoyed by it. Helene Vivian glanced at him and felt that this person was a little unhappy. She frowned, "Then tell them to stop." Beligaju's fingers, which were hidden under his long sleeves, clenched. He smiled wickedly and said coldly, "Drive faster." Hellion Vivian. Was the royal deliberately making things difficult for her today? Did they have to be so unreasonable? Perhaps, I can stay here for a while before going down. Chatting until now, Wei Wei had a bit of awareness. Third Prince didn't want other people to know about the relationship between the two of them right now. Beligaju grunted and slightly tilted his head to the left, as if he didn't want Hellion Vivian to see his current mood. Hellion Vivian didn't care where she slept. In any case, as long as she met with Heizei before entering the capital and discussed the matter of the martial chi competition, it would be fine. Thinking like this, she casually found a place to sit down and leaned against the window. She was very self-aware and distanced herself from the third prince. Sensing her thoughts, Beligaju faintly met her gaze. "You seem to be particularly resistant to this, Highness." Hellion Vivian thought she misheard. "No, doesn't your Highness hate being approached?" She was abiding by the rules. Beligaju stared at her. "After the martial chi competition, you and I will be married. There's nothing wrong with getting used to it in advance." Hellion Vivian smiled. "There's no need to get used to it, I'm fine with it. This Highness can't." Beligaju's voice was very indifferent. "You also know that this Highness hates being approached." Hellion Vivian was choked by his words. Then. Hellion Vivian was still thinking of a way. Don't say, this really was a problem. After becoming husband and wife, who would even stand so far away from each other? It was obvious at a glance that it was fake. The royal was very efficient and decisively cut off her excuse. "Come here." "What are you doing?" Hellion Vivian looked at his slender fingers tapping on the wooden table, slightly puzzled. Beligaju looked at her as if he was looking at an idiot. "Getting used to it in advance." "How?" Hellion Vivian's words abruptly stopped, not for any other reason, because in the next second, she was embraced into a fragrant and floating chest. The slightly cool body temperature, with a strong masculine scent, made Hellion Vivian's body stiffen. As if he didn't notice her reaction, the royal still had a calm expression, as if holding her in his arms was really just to get used to it in advance. Hellion Vivian felt that this kind of stiff muscles was too uncomfortable, so she simply relaxed her arms with a clear conscience. She raised an eyebrow and said, "Can this be tolerated?" "It's within the acceptable range." The royal's tone was very light, so light that Hellion Vivian felt that she actually felt guilty. It seemed that she shouldn't have doubted the man's intentions just now. He should really not be used to being close to others. No wonder he would rather have his wound hurt than let the servants bandage it. As soon as she came in, he frowned. He probably didn't like people standing in his territory. She had been in contact with people with mysophobia before. They looked at everyone as germs. It was really difficult for the royal to hold a huge germ like her. Hellion Vivian thought of this, and her posture became more relaxed. She lazily yawned and said in a daze, "Then tell me when you can't stand it, and I'll push you away." "Okay." Beligaju reached out and hugged her a little tighter. The softness in his arms made his thin lips curl, and the air of evilness rushed to his face. Oh, she was so easily hooked. It could be seen that this little thing still cared about him. Fire Qilin, who came to watch, silently turned its head. This liar, who didn't even blink when he lied, was really its master. However, it wasn't wrong to think about it. His Highness' principle of treating his prey was to use all means possible. But when it came to patience, this seemed to be the first time. But it was obvious that Hellion Vivian's attention to other men made His Highness lose this patience. Chapter 209. Why aren't you continuing? Beligaju stopped what he was doing, as if he was smiling, but there wasn't the slightest trace of a smile in his eyes. Even though Helene Vivian felt that she didn't handle this matter properly, but what she had to say, she still had to say, "Your Highness, we made a contract. It says that we should help each other, not restrain each other." Beligaju didn't look at her, as if he didn't care about what she said, but also as if he was a little absent-minded. He didn't even notice that the hot tea in his hand had spilled out. He only said with a cold voice, "You mean to say that even if you want to see Zay, I can't do anything about it?" "No." Helene Vivian saw that his hot tea was about to stain the wound on his palm. She reached out and held his left hand, moving it to the side, and said again, "I just feel that we can't affect each other's freedom. If your Highness wants to see a woman today, and I say that I don't want your Highness to go, your Highness will definitely feel uncomfortable. After all, you won't." Without waiting for Helene Vivian to finish speaking, Beligaju faintly interrupted her, and said with a clear and cold tone, "I know who I'm going to marry." In other words, you don't know who you're going to marry. Being said like this by a man, Helene Vivian actually felt a bit guilty. Logically speaking, it was indeed a taboo for a normal couple. Have you ever thought about what the consequences would be if you lost your reputation before the martial chi test? Beligaju's voice didn't seem to have changed, but the clouds outside suddenly thickened by a layer. The originally light breeze suddenly became more than twice as strong, sweeping past her ears, like 10 armies and 10,000 horses trampling on withered leaves. It was a bit scary. The consequences would be that you can't marry into the imperial family for the rest of your life. Helene Vivian was just about to open her mouth when she heard him continue, "This Highness will not allow anyone to break the contract between you and this Highness. If you insist on seeing him, then this Highness can only take action and help the Hay family take care of their second young master." Helene Vivian's eyes darkened. She had never thought that things would develop like this. Only now did she clearly understand what people meant by the royal family's methods. For a long time, he had been indifferent, even elegant to the point of indifference. So much so that she forgot how ruthless he was when he hunted her down. As for the royal family, as long as you didn't touch his reverse scale, everything would be fine. If you ruined his plan, he wouldn't mind showing you what he was capable of. It was only because in this game, she was just a chess piece, so it was natural for him to care about her reputation. Helene Vivian smiled and raised her head to reply, "I know." Then she sat back down in her original seat, polite but distant. A cooperation should look like a cooperation. Although the royal family's words were a bit heartless, it was the truth. It was just that Helene Wei Wei had an alarm in her heart. She would never be anyone's chess piece. This game was started by her, so she should be the one to end it. From now on, she had to carefully plan how to escape unscathed. Because she realized that the partner she had chosen was really more dangerous than she had imagined. If she wasn't careful, there might be a bottomless abyss in front of her. Helene Vivian liked to work with this kind of person. That would make everything easier. However, at the same time, Helene Vivian also knew that she had to be careful in the future. In this game, not only did they have to work together to deal with each other, they also had to maintain their distance. Having encountered such a well-matched opponent, Helene Wei Wei felt that her whole body was filled with vigor. She even thought that in the future, when everything was settled, she would wander to the ends of the world and look for Bailey Jia Ju to fight. As for now, it was better to be clear about her position. As for Hei's, she could only make an appointment at the academy. Beligaju found that he didn't like her obedience at all. That kind of distance that came from her bones was like a wall, forcibly pushing him a meter away. For a Hei's, she was like this. Ha! Good, very good. Beligaju narrowed his eyes, his expression proud and lonely. An ice-cold wind blew across his face. She was just a prey that he liked more. He slowly clenched his hand. Although he was mocking her in his heart, he couldn't help but tighten his grip on the scroll. The atmosphere in the carriage seemed to have frozen. When Eunuch's son opened the curtain, he saw this scene. He was hesitating whether or not to shrink back. Beligaju raised his eyes to look at him, then lazily leaned back. He casually untied his robe with one hand and casually put the other hand on the side. What is it? Something was wrong. Eunuch's son understood His Highness. The worse his mood was, the more he would be like this. Strange, according to what they said, His Highness was in a good mood the whole way. He even asked for some tea and snacks, saying that it was for someone to eat. How did it become like this now? Eunuch's son held the tray in his hands. He thought for a moment and said, Your Highness, do you want to eat this osmanthus cake with tea? Or this old servant will go get some candied fruits for you. No need. Beligaju's deep voice floated over with the sound of rain. No one is eating it anymore. Hearing this, Eunuch's son felt more and more that something was wrong. He looked at Hellion Vivian and gave her a meaningful look. Hellion Vivian reached out and brought the wooden tray over. She put it in Beligaju's hand. After thinking for a moment, she said, Eat more, Your Highness' hand will heal faster. The wind outside seemed to be a bit weaker. Bailey Jia Ju glanced at her and did not refuse. He only used his eyes to glance at his left hand, and then at her face. After serving Beligaju for so many years, Eunuch's son understood His Highness the most. Seeing this scene, he quickly said, Eldest Miss, it is inconvenient for His Highness to eat with his hand. This old servant's hand is also dirty. I ask the eldest miss to help this old servant persuade His Highness to eat a few more pieces. Without waiting for Hellion Vivian to decline, Eunuch's son retreated from the carriage. Hellion Vivian was still a bit hesitant. On the other side, Bailey Jia Ju had already clumsily picked up a piece of pastry with his hand wrapped in a white handkerchief. Probably because the pastry touched his wound, his long eyebrows also wrinkled. The crumbs of the pastry scattered on his gown and rolled to the side of her feet. He appeared to be somewhat embarrassed. Hellion Vivian didn't think much of it. She directly took the other pieces of pastry from the tray and put them in front of his mouth. Just when Hellion Vivian thought that he would dislike her hand, the royal prince opened his mouth. When his thin lips slid across the pastry, he lightly touched her finger. It was a bit cold that was hard to ignore. Hellion Vivian couldn't help but take a step back. Looking at Beligaju's slightly puzzled eyebrows, she felt that she was making a fuss over nothing. Chapter 210. His Highness probably didn't bite her finger on purpose. Although this man's mind was very deep, he didn't seem to think too much about the matters between men and women. According to Hellion Vivian's experience, she felt that this kind of abstinent Prince Charming usually liked soft little white rabbits because it was more fun to bully them. Hellion Vivian wasn't wrong. There were indeed many people who liked that kind of thing. But she had never thought about it. There was a kind of man called Beligaju. He didn't like to bully little white rabbits, but lazy and difficult to tame people like her. The more difficult it was to manipulate, the more Beligaju wanted to break her claws. The wind outside the carriage finally slowed down, and it was very comfortable to blow on the face. Okay, you can eat the rest. It was originally prepared for someone, so Beligaju naturally wouldn't eat too much. What's more, he had never liked to eat these things. Since he had already taken advantage of it, he would stop. The smarter the prey, the more he had to stew the frog in warm water, gradually. As for the other obstacles, Beligaju narrowed his eyes and slid the tip of his tongue over his fingertips. If necessary, he would personally take action. Hellion Vivian at the side didn't know that Beligaju had this idea, or it could be said that she was a little hungry since just now. She looked at the half-piece of osmanthus cake in her hand, opened her mouth and swallowed it. Her eating posture was elegant, but her small face was still puffed up. The osmanthus cake tasted very good. It wasn't too sweet, and it was made with the best honey. When it melted in the mouth, it was so delicious that Hellion Vivian was very satisfied. Beligaju looked at her and was stunned. This highness ate that before. Hellion Vivian puffed up her cheeks and looked up, chewing the osmanthus cake in her mouth. Didn't you say that I should eat the rest? Beligaju looked at her indifferently and seemed to be quite helpless. He supported his forehead with his fingers. I was talking about the food on the plate. Forget it, you continue to eat. For some reason, Hellion Vivian felt that the words, forget it, were an insult to her intelligence. Looking at the small face in front of him, Beligaju's eyes flashed with a smile. He put his finger to his mouth and coughed a few times. Hellion Vivian naturally saw that he was making fun of her, and suddenly felt a little depressed. Thinking about it, she was usually very smart, but why did she always feel that her brain was not enough in front of this man? Go ahead and laugh if you want to. Hellion Wei Wei leaned back and curled her lips. That kind of vexed little action was very small, but it was clearly caught by the black-bellied His Highness. He thought, in fact, this prey has a weakness. As long as he can hold on, there will be a day when he can directly eat her. He was looking forward to her performance after the wedding. I should be able to use the golden silk prison bed in the palace. She was very suitable to lie on top of it and be slowly invaded by him. That scene would definitely be very beautiful, His prey must be matched with the best things so that he can offend her to his heart's content. Your Highness, the carriage is about to enter the city. Eunuch's son paid attention to the surroundings. Even if he didn't want to, he had to remind his master through the curtain. In a while, the carriage of the academy students will take a fork in the road and will separate from the carriage entering the city. Do you think it's time for this servant to send eldest young miss back, in case there are too many people talking about it? This time, Hellion Wei Wei did not wait for Bailey Jia Ju to open his mouth. She patted the osmanthus cake off her body and directly lifted the carriage curtain. She smiled faintly and said, Eunuch's son, please lead the way. I have to go back. Eunuch's son looked at Beligaju behind her and saw that his master did not smile coldly. Only then did he nod his head and answer frankly, yes. Beligaju indifferently drank a mouthful of tea. After Hellion Vivian left, he glanced at Aning. Aning naturally understood his master's meaning. He respectfully lowered his eyes and then swept in the direction of Hellion Vivian. To walk back to his own carriage from the third prince's carriage, there was originally a distance between them. But Eunuch's son was a shrewd person. Along the way, he made arrangements and asked someone to drive Hellion Vivian's carriage in front and behind. This way, it was convenient to change. Eunuch's son lifted the curtain for Hellion Vivian with a smile on his face. This time, it's all thanks to the eldest miss. As servants, we are worried about His Highness, but we can't understand his thoughts. We can only rely on the eldest miss's help. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows and chuckled. I also can't understand your master's thoughts, but it's right to follow the fur of a tiger. Eunuch's son suddenly choked. It's not good to compare His Highness to a tiger, right? Hellion Vivian did not look at his reaction and entered the carriage. What's wrong? Beligaju looked at Aning, who came back in less than a quarter of an hour, and raised his beautiful eyebrows. Shadow thought about it for a while, but still decided to recite Hellion Wei Wei's words to him. Bailey Jia Ju sneered, she's actually smart. So it turned out that she was just coaxing him. He thought that she was being sincere. Such a little thing, she was not afraid of a tiger like him swallowing her. He thought that even she helped him bandage his wound under Eunuch's son's instructions. His good mood just now had changed, and it made his eyes turn even colder. Follow the fur of a tiger. Who was the real prey between the two of them? It seemed that someone still did not know what to do with her claws. Continue to look at her. Belikaju withdrew his gaze. Shadow, however, was somewhat lost in his own thoughts. He'd also thought that if he told that information to His Highness definitely wouldn't spend so much energy on Wei Wei like he did now. To him, there should only be that one person who was special. But Ning could not help but rejoice that there was a person like Hellion Vivian, so His Highness did not have time to listen to other news until now. It's just that Shadow looked at the carriage not too far away and let out a long sigh. If the main character really did come, then Wei Wei, to His Highness, would only be left as a tool to be used. However, no one cared about those minor details anymore, because returning from the Hidden Spirit Temple meant that the martial chi competition that everyone was looking forward to was about to begin. Regardless of whether it was the students of the White Academy or the people of the 4 great clans, all of them put their attention on this matter, cultivating all day long. Gradually, many experts wearing capes and carrying armaments on the streets gradually appeared in the capital city. All of them came from other places, which was enough to show how big the impact of this test was. What Hellion Wei Wei wanted to do was to take advantage of this influence and make a lot of money. The martial chi test was about to begin. Getting a good armament was an urgent matter for every martial artist. And as the boss of Profound Heaven, she naturally would not let go of such a good business opportunity. Besides, it was time to close the net and catch the fish. Chapter 211. Originally, it was very difficult for Hellion Vivian to leave the White Academy in the past. Firstly, she did not have the authority. Secondly, after she was driven out by her family, those teachers had always looked down on her. In addition, her master, Grandmaster Zizun, was not around recently. If she wanted to ask for leave, she even had to write the reason why she wanted to do something. Now it was different. The leave in her hands was won by the Academy's examination. No one would ask where she went and what she did down the mountain. Therefore, after returning to the White Academy again, Hellion Vivian did not go to class unlike ordinary people, which made everyone think that she was shocked. After all, a person who only knew how to do martial arts but did not understand what martial chi was, appearing in class at this time was indeed very awkward. Some people even suspected that Hellion Wei Wei simply did not understand the principles that the teacher was talking about. That was why she took the initiative to give up on the lessons during this period of time, so that everyone would not be able to take care of her when they were practicing martial chi. After hearing this news, the Hellion Jower coldly snorted. She is quite self-aware this time. As she spoke, she instructed the servant girl below, in the future, there is no need to inquire about this little bitch anymore. Mother is right, I was too short-sighted in the past. Being serious with an ugly woman like her is simply lowering my own taste. Let her fiddle with her pile of scrap iron in her dreams. No matter how well she does it, she won't be able to sell a single piece, let alone participate in the martial chi competition. Go and see when Mother will be back, and help me ask about the current situation of Profound Heaven. Yes. The servant girl saw that her miss was in a good mood, and her attitude also followed suit. Miss wants to get an armament from Profound Heaven before the martial chi competition. The Hellion Jower nodded, that small face with arrogance. Father should have already set up a connection for me, now I am just waiting for Mother to come back. The servant girl took the opportunity to flatter, you are really worthy of being Miss. This servant heard that the armament of Profound Heaven is very difficult to get, few of the young ladies in the capital can get it. Father's connections are naturally not weak. Hellion Jiao Air blew on her freshly dyed red hair and coolly glanced at her. What's more, those people who only rely on their families to get ahead, how can they compare to me? The servant girl smiled, Miss is right. Presumably, the boss of Profound Heavens heard of your reputation in the capital and knew that he had offended you in Armament City. He wanted to give Miss an armament to atone for his crime. You can say that in front of me, but don't say that in front of outsiders. Although Hellion Jower was scolding her, her face was full of pride. The maidservant lowered her eyes. "Young miss, don't worry. I know that those people outside are jealous of you. I won't say such words outside. If you were to meet someone like the eldest miss who had evil intentions, what kind of trouble would it cause? It's good that you understand." The Hellion Giaour leaned back and reclined on the sandalwood chair. She looked like she had already obtained the profound heaven's armament. The servant girl smiled again and fawningly handed her a cup of tea. Her every move was subservient. She breathed a sigh of relief, thinking that the young miss had finally returned to normal. During this time, because of the eldest miss, the young miss's mood had never been good. In the end, the ones who suffered were them, the servants. However, the eldest miss was also too much. Why did she like to jump around in front of the young miss so much? Now that something big happened, she was beaten back to her original state. She probably also felt that her martial chi was not good enough, so she found a place to hide. As the servant girl thought, she looked at the Hellion Giaour's face. Seeing that she seemed to be asleep, she gently put down the fan in her hand and also took a nap. However, they didn't know that at this moment, Hellion Vivian was sitting on the second floor of Profound Heaven's #1 shop. She was dressed in men's clothing and holding a paper umbrella. She stood with her back to the light, making the servant who came to greet her very puzzled. "This guest, our steward, is out today. We don't know when he will be back. Would you like to come back another day?" The servant who was doing chores was very polite and his tone was gentle. This was the recruitment policy of Profound Heavens. No matter how good the other party was, Hellion Vivian's first rule was to choose a servant who could make the customer feel good. Therefore, the reason why Profound Heaven's business was so good was not without reason. Hellion Vivian turned around and looked at him. Her thin lips slightly curved. "I'll wait for a while." The servant was stunned. Obviously, he was stunned by the person in front of him. He had never seen anyone who looked so gorgeous. At this time, Hellion Wei Wei had regained her appearance. She was wearing a long robe with a golden border and clouds inlaid with 1-inch wide roses. Her beautiful hair was lazily draped over her ears. Her jet black hair was alluring. She was not dressed very neatly, but her figure was graceful and graceful. Her posture was elegant, her complexion was magnificent, and her aura was like the moon. Under the golden sunset, her straight and slender legs were more beautiful than a model's. Especially when her red sleeves floated in the air and she held a folded umbrella in her hand. The servant thought that he had seen a fairy from the sky. He was a little confused and stood there in a daze. He began to wonder which family this young lady was from. How could she be born with such a bewitching appearance? Yes, although Hellion Vivian was wearing men's clothing. But the shrewd servant still saw her gender, so he was even more confused. He knew a lot of people in the capital, but he had never seen anyone who was more outstanding than this person in front of him. Strangely, he had never seen this person before. No one in the capital had ever mentioned such a person. While the servant was puzzled, he saw the carriages of the 4 stewards appear in front of the shop. The servant was shocked. Usually, only 1 or 2 stewards came to the shop. Why were all 4 stewards here today? Could it be that the second boss was coming? That's not right. The second boss sent a message the day before yesterday, saying that his father had been very strict recently and was forcing him to get married. He disliked that he was always hanging around outside, so he was grounded in the backyard. He said that he would only be released in 2 days. Then what could have happened, for all 4 of the stewards to come? The servant thought for a moment. He could no longer care about the guests behind him. He quickly tidied his collar and hurriedly ran downstairs. Unexpectedly, before he could speak, Steward Zhang asked him, "Is someone looking for this old man today?" "Yes." The servant quickly responded and followed Steward Zhang to look around. Where is that person? Strangely, Steward Zhang, who had always been calm, sounded a little anxious. The servant pointed upstairs. That guest is still waiting in the private room on the second floor. On the second floor. Steward Zhang clenched his teeth. Why did you arrange for him to be on the second floor? Chapter 2:12. The servant thought to himself, it wasn't me who arranged this. It was that person who entered the building as if it was her own home. She entered the private room as if she was familiar with the place. She knew the layout better than him. The second floor it is. Manager Zhang lifted his robe and hurriedly walked upstairs. As he walked, he said, "Go and bring me the best armament parts and the accounts of the store for the past 2 days." The servant exclaimed, "Look at it now. Look at it now." As Manager Zhang spoke, he had already pushed open the door. After seeing that familiar figure, he smiled with relief. "Big boss, you're finally here." "Big boss?" The servant looked up in shock. His eyes flashed with unconcealable astonishment. This person turned out to be the elusive big boss of Profound Heaven. The servant obviously didn't dare to believe it. He glanced at Hellion Vivian again. Wait a minute, he needed time to cool down. Their big boss wasn't a man, wasn't a mighty and majestic man. Instead, it was a young girl who looked less than 20 years old. What happened to the back of a tiger and the waist of a bear? What happened to the white-haired old man? What happened to the reclusive master? What happened to the man who had never shown his face because of his ugly appearance? Their big boss clearly only relied on her face to win against many people, Uncle Zhang. Hellion Vivian smiled. She reached out and shook hands with Manager Zhang. Then, she glanced at the servant. The servant was dazed. He thought that this voice was also very pleasant to hear. Manager Zhang slapped the back of the servant's head. "Why are you still in a daze? Hurry up and prepare the things I just asked you to bring." After he finished speaking, he smiled at Hellion Vivian. "This is this old servant's new disciple. He just entered the store and is not familiar with it." Hellion Vivian smiled. "Very good. We can hang him in the store as a mascot." The servant suddenly felt like he was in a dream. Was he just praised by his idol? No, after getting the accounts, he must go downstairs and run a few laps. Steward Zhang looked at his own subordinate going downstairs foolishly, helplessly shook his head and said to Hellion Wei Wei, as soon as this old servant received the boss's letter, this old servant rushed back from outside. "Only, I don't know what the boss meant by making a profit. Old Zhang, that's enough. Our brothers haven't all arrived yet and you want to trick the boss into giving you lessons." The burly manager Wei walked up. Wei Wei saw that all of her capable subordinates had arrived, only then did she put away the umbrella in her hand, her eyes shining. "You should all know that the armaments test is about to begin. Compared to other armaments, our business is indeed not bad. However, compared to what I expected, it's still a bit worse. That's why, starting today, we need to change our business philosophy. From now on, the only thing we need to do is to build momentum." Build momentum. Steward Wei was a little confused. Profound Heavens is currently flourishing. Those people are squeezing their heads and trying to order an armament from our guild. Who in the entire capital city doesn't know about Profound Heavens? They are no different from country bumpkins. Hellion Vivian put down the umbrella in her hand. Although the action was light, because of the excellent armament, it changed the surrounding airflow. This is not enough. This is not enough. Manager Wei stared and turned to look at Manager Zhang. Even the calm and steady Manager Zhang couldn't understand Hellion Vivian's meaning. He could only wait for Hellion Vivian's next words. Hellion Vivian's slender fingers tapped on the table. When she looked up, the sun was setting. Outside the large French windows, it was as if the entire evening had become her foil. Her eyes flashed with a burning light. The harder it is to obtain something, the more precious it is. Let's spread our brand. From today onwards, stop all armaments production. Tell them that in the next few days, Profound Heavens will only sell 5 armaments. We will implement a membership gold card system. We will sell armaments in the form of an auction. Every day, the auction house will only invite 100 gold card members to participate in the auction. If you want to see it, you can come and visit. But there's one thing, you have to reserve the location in advance. This approach is a bit too bold. Manager Wei was tongue-tied. He had never thought that doing business could be done this way. After all, when they opened the shop, Big Boss had told them that everything should be based on the customer's feelings. Now, it seemed like it was the other way around. Was it possible for those high-ranking officials and nobles to curry favor with them? What's more, those people were not only rich merchants, but also first-ranking officials. Would they accept this approach? However, Manager Wei had to admit that once this approach was successful, they would completely break through the current stage and truly enjoy the same treatment as the century-old aristocratic family shop. This made him feel excited no matter how he thought about it. Helene Vivian glanced at him and smiled evilly. Where we come from, there's a term called private customization. There's also a term called limited release. Manager Wei, you have to remember that the so-called private customization and limited release only mean one thing. Some people need these things to show their worth. It's not for anything else, but to let everyone know that they have something that no one else in this world can have. So there's no problem at all. Taking advantage of this opportunity, we'll make a good profit. At that moment, Manager Wei felt that the young lady in front of him didn't seem like a businesswoman. Her mouth carried an evil aura that ordinary women didn't have. It was like a raging fire that easily made people think of a battlefield. She was like a queen standing behind the scenes, arranging and scheming, commanding the troops. This time, the capital's business circle would probably be reshuffled again. When Profound Heavens limited edition armaments were launched, it attracted the attention of all the big circles in the capital. Just like what Helene Vivian said, one of a kind, this kind of symbol of status was very eye-catching. Adding on the fact that the armaments test was approaching, everyone was very curious about the auction that would be held the day after tomorrow. Even those who didn't need armaments also wanted to see the elegance of the limited edition armaments. It could be said that they had no regrets in life. Even the retired emperor, who had always been experienced and knowledgeable, was alarmed. He sent people to Profound Heaven to reserve a seat for the auction, preparing to personally see the legendary armaments. Big Boss, is this okay? Manager Zhang took out a pure silver card and gave it to Helene Vivian. Helene Vivian took it and looked at it. Her beautiful fingers twirled around and the corners of her mouth slightly curved. Not bad. When you give it to everyone, make sure that it's real money. Tell them that here, identity and whatnot are of no use. Yes. Manager Zhang slightly lowered his head. To be honest, he completely didn't think that this kind of card would be bought by people. But the situation was beyond his imagination. Now, the whole capital was talking about the silver card. In their eyes, this kind of silver card had already become a symbol of noble status. Chapter 213. It was night and the moonlight was getting darker. Outside the window, one could see the mountains and trees. The steward of the general's residence was holding a lantern outside the door in the middle of the night. He looked left and right as if he was waiting for someone, looking very mysterious. When he saw the carriage coming, he hurriedly held the lantern and went up to it. "Madam." It turned out that the person who rushed back in the middle of the night was none other than Su Yan Mo, who was ordered by the retired emperor to stay in the hidden spirit temple to abstain from meat and pray. This trip to the hidden spirit temple not only caused her to lose a maidservant for no reason, but she also lost 70 to 80% of her face. If it weren't for her husband's family having a say in the imperial court, she really would have stayed in the hidden spirit temple for 10 days to half a month. But even if it was only 3 days, it was enough to make Su Yen Mo vomit a ball of anger in her heart. She glanced at the steward coldly. "What about the thing I asked you to do?" "Don't worry, madam, I have already made arrangements. Recently, Profound Heavens is doing some kind of VIP card distribution. I have already made an appointment with the steward there. Tomorrow, madam will be able to bring Miss there. You will definitely be able to buy a good armament." The steward held the lantern for Su Yen Mo while waiting at her beck and call. Su Yen Mo nodded in satisfaction and said, "What has that little bastard been doing recently? Eldest Miss doesn't have the slightest bit of martial chi in her body. Recently, White Academy's courses are all related to martial chi. She probably couldn't stay any longer and asked for leave." The steward reported word for word the news he received from the courtyard. Su Yen Mo smiled, her face showing her natural arrogance. "All right, you can leave. We will go to Profound Heavens first thing in the morning tomorrow." After so many years of flattery, she knew that little bastard better than anyone else. She felt inferior, yet she wanted to stand out. Now, she finally knew what she was worth. After this martial chi test, that little bastard would understand that she and her beloved daughter were not on the same level at all. She was originally a good-for-nothing, and when her name was removed from the family, she left so vigorously. At that time, she would still have to come back like a beggar without a single redeeming feature and beg for a living. Su Yen Mo thought of the future scene and the smile on the corner of her mouth became wider. One should not be so naive. She was so muddle-headed that she had even forgotten who she was, yet she still dared to provoke her. Sooner or later, that little bastard would kneel on the ground and lick her feet. She was not in a hurry. This was just the beginning. At night, the crescent moon hung in the sky. In the extremely luxurious palace, there were layers of white gauze curtains. A huge and incomparably luxurious golden cage was placed in the middle of the bedroom. Beside the cage was a pool of clear water. Inside the cage was a large carved bed made of pure wood. There was something like a bracelet hanging on the bed. That thing was made of pure gold, with intricate patterns on it. It looked exquisite and enchanting, just enough to buckle one's wrist. The side of the bracelet that was close to the skin was inlaid with a layer of rabbit fur, soft and comfortable, and would not hurt when worn. Further inside, there was a dazzling golden piece. A person was lying on the soft bed, his white brocade robe swaying gently in the wind. His picturesque side face was covered with a layer of brilliance. He held an ancient scroll in one hand and supported his head lazily, as if he was very satisfied with this newly made golden cage. The corner of his mouth had a faint smile, his charm was not diminished by the luxurious golden light in the room. On the contrary, he was elegant and charming, taking the full advantage of the romantic. Nangong Lai, who was sitting opposite him, shuddered when he saw his smile. "Ah, Ju, are you really going to sleep here in the future?" "Yes." Beligaju responded unhurriedly. Nangong Lai swallowed a mouthful of tea. "Don't you think this thing is too eye-catching? Making a pure gold cage as a bed, only he could think of it." Beligaju slowly turned a page of the ancient scroll in his hand. "I don't think so." Nangong Lai was speechless. "The point is, what do you want to do with this thing? Don't tell me you really want to lock Hellion Vivian up." Nangong Lai used to think that he was just joking. Beligaju glanced at him. "What does this have to do with you?" "I'm just curious. Nangong Lai was mentally and physically exhausted. Most people don't want to be locked up. "Ah, Ju, you have to understand, no matter how interesting she is in your eyes, it's the same. When she sees this kind of thing, she will definitely run away. The word escape made the light in Bailey Jiaju's eyes turn cold. He slightly stood up, one elbow propped on the chair under his body, the other arm casually rested on his bent knee. It was obviously a languid posture, but when he did it, it interpreted extreme danger. She won't have that chance. Listening to the movements in the room, the eunuch outside the door had already poked his head in to look many times. He probably wanted to ask when Baligaju was going to take a bath, but he didn't dare to come in. Finally, Baligaju put the scroll beside the pillow and stood up. The servant at the side immediately stepped forward to help him put on his boots. He was dressed in a moon-white rose robe with a large fur coat made of fiery red fox skin draped over it. Just as he was about to change into the White Academy's uniform, he saw a dark shadow pass by and respectfully kneel on the ground. "Your Highness, we have lost track of the person." Baligaju's slender fingers paused and looked towards the shadow. His dark eyes became more and more cold like ice. "Lost her? Miss Hellion seemed to be preparing to meet someone and only discovered us halfway. After that, she threw off all of our shadows." Shadow hung his head down heavily. Baligaju didn't speak. His white hand threw away the robe. The light outside the window hit his bare waist and spread a thin layer of red. It made him look like a precious ivory sculpture that should be stored in the innermost part of a museum. It was very low-key and luxurious. Nangong Lai analyzed. She must have gone to meet someone important. Otherwise, she wouldn't have thrown them off. Could it be that she went to see Heizei? "Ah, Ju, did you notice that when we were competing, she and Heizei were acting strangely?" Crack. Not waiting for Nangong Lai to finish speaking. The teacup he was holding seemed to be shattered by some invisible force. Nangong Lai opened his mouth and stared blankly. His face was a mess. The tea slid down the side of his face and dripped onto the table. He subconsciously looked toward Bailey Jiaju, only to see that man, who had always been expressionless, punch the wall with the side of his fist. His knuckles overflowed with blood, but he was completely unaware of it. There was still a smile on the corner of his mouth. The wall was full of cracks with uneven lines. A cool breeze swept past, rolling up his ink-black hair like silk. The surrounding space was so cold that it was somewhat inconceivable. Nangong Lai looked at this scene and slightly narrowed his eyes. So intense, not like his style at all. Chapter 2:14. The night grew darker. Hellion Vivian, who everyone thought was hiding because she was afraid of losing face, had already finished the last armament. She reached out and pressed her neck, turning left and right handsomely. Then, looking at the 5 dazzling armaments on the table, she lazily smiled. "Where's Heizei?" "He's not here yet. Young Master was locked up by Master. I'm afraid he won't be able to come out for the next few days." Manager Zhang marveled at the exquisiteness of those armaments. His eyes were filled with emotion. Holding a magnifying glass in his hand, he looked at them from beginning to end. Hellion Vivian smiled and sat down on the wooden chair. Immediately, someone handed her tea. Hellion Vivian thanked the servant, then asked, "Hasn't he been quite well behaved recently? Why does Master He still dislike him?" "It seems that because he did something, the royal family sent people to investigate." Manager Zhang didn't take this matter to heart. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. She didn't know that a certain highness would find trouble with Heizei. In the future, she would find time to properly talk to a certain highness. He was an ally, so he couldn't casually use a knife. There's still 4 more hours until daybreak. You all should go to sleep. Hellion Vivian put down the teacup in her hand. As if she thought of something, she said, "Oh right, leave 3 spots for me." Manager Zhang frowned. 3 spots. Miss still doesn't want to announce your boss's identity. It's not time yet. Helene Vivian curved her thin lips, however, it's still okay to properly enjoy the privilege. When the time comes, I'll bring my friend over. Manager Zhang's face lit up. Miss Friend? Which family's young master, or is it Miss? It's not some young master, right? Helene Wei lazily yawned. I'm not sure about that person's family background, but his appearance is very attractive. If in the future he's the spokesperson for our martial arts academy, money will definitely drop like a crashing crash. Manager Zhang felt that he didn't understand the big boss's words. Endorsement. Just take our armaments and go out to fight. Helene Vivian recalled the scene of her deskmate instantly killing the Yuan family's young master in White Academy, and the smile on the corner of her mouth became even wider. He's the kind of person who can control any kind of martial cultivator. When Manager Zhang heard this, his face was filled with astonishment. What kind of martial cultivator can control it? Did such a person still exist in the War Dragon Empire? Logically speaking, martial cultivators and martial artists' martial chi complemented each other. How could there be someone who could control any martial cultivator? Manager Zhang scratched his head. Helene Vivian was already asleep. Her body was leaning against a wooden chair in a lazy posture. Her long hair fluttered on the golden-colored carpet. Coupled with the fact that she was wearing men's clothing, she really looked like an exquisite and beautiful young man who had walked out of a manga. How could he fall asleep like this? Steward Zhang shook his head, glanced at the servant beside him, and made a shushing gesture. The miss was undoubtedly the most tired today. From the design of the cards to the assembly of the martial cultivators, it was all done by her alone. She didn't even eat a few bites of dinner. She was always busy and busy. Now that she finally had some free time, Manager Zhang didn't disturb her anymore. He retreated with the servant and gave a few instructions to the people below. Manager Zhang looked at the brightly lit auction house. Everywhere was filled with luxury. Every seat here needed to be reserved. The seats at the back cost 10,000 taels, not to mention what kind of status the people sitting in the front row had. This kind of model was unprecedented. In other words, their boss had created another miracle. Only, who would have thought that this miracle was created by the young girl who everyone thought was a good-for-nothing until now? The next day, the capital was in an uproar. Originally, the martial chi competition was about to begin. These 8 big alleys were already filled with people coming and going. Now, because of the martial cultivator auction, it attracted countless martial artists. Some people said that this auction was not the slightest bit inferior to young Master Wu Shuang's auction of martial cultivators. Therefore, in this group of people, not only were there high officials and nobles who wanted to broaden their horizons, there were also various masters in the martial cultivator world. Of course, there were also masters who didn't like the younger generation of Profound Heavens. After all, they were all at that age and had prestige in the capital. This little brat came, wasn't he provoking them? No matter from which perspective, Profound Heavens was creating a first-class spectacle. For the sake of participating in this auction, Helian Zhao Air specially wore a light purple long skirt. The cuffs were embroidered with the same color decorative designs. Silver threads hooked out several pieces of auspicious clouds, with tassels. Her hair was wrapped in a pure white gauze, contrasting with her even more elegant and beautiful appearance. As soon as she got off the carriage, quite a few people turned to look in her direction. It was a pity that beauties always liked to be half-covered, so that they would be more charming. Unfortunately, they wanted to make people unable to see their appearance clearly. Her hand gently held Madame Sue's arm, and she stood at the side like a small and delicate person, watching Madame Sue greet the high officials and nobles who passed by. Those people also wanted to curry favor with Madame Sue, so they didn't mention the part where she was locked up in the temple. Instead, they chatted about all kinds of things, wanting to sit closer to Madame Sue. Therefore, there was no lack of people who wanted to curry favor with her. She pulled Madame Sue's hand and said, "Sister, you're finally here. I heard some time ago that your family has a good relationship with the boss of Profound Heavens. I'm relying on Sister to arrange a good seat. It's just through letters." Madame Sue said modestly, but her heart was full of pride. She smiled gently and said, "Sister, you also know that I'm not in the capital these days. I can help you arrange a good seat." That person laughed. "What did I say? Sister Mo is the one with the ability. Okay, let's go in early. The sun outside is scary. My girl's skin has been delicate since she was young. She can't stand the sun." Madame Sue finished speaking and shook her head, but with a subtle sense of superiority. Hearing this, everyone looked at the Hellion Jower. "This is Jower, right? She's really a beauty that can cause the downfall of a city. She's a beauty that can captivate birds and beasts. How can you say that people can't be compared? My girl stays in the house all day long, and she's cultivating in the academy. After cultivating for so long, she still doesn't have a bit of martial chi. Look at Jower, not only is she beautiful, she's also a genius. I think that this time, she'll surprise everyone again. I heard that there are martial artists from Cloud Fall Nation who came specifically for Jower, wanting to compete with her. Even people from Cloud Fall Nation know about Jower's fame. That's really not simple." "That's right, I heard that it was Master Wu Shuang who brought them. One is a prince from a neighboring country, and the other is a princess from a neighboring country. They both want to see Jower's face." Chapter 2:15. I think that whatever princess is jealous. Someone laughed and intimately pinched the Hellion Jower's face. "Look at you, how did you give birth to such a beautiful face? You're going to outshine all the women in the world. Auntie Chen, you're making fun of Jower again." The Hellion Jower shyly lowered her eyes, but the corners of her mouth revealed a complacent smile. The maid standing next to the Hellion Jower also spoke without restraint. "Young miss, you're too kind and too modest. You're obviously the most beautiful." Unexpectedly, as soon as her voice fell, a person walked over from not far away. That person seemed to have just woken up. Her jade-like green left hand held a bamboo umbrella, and under the umbrella was a person wearing a red feathered gown. She walked very lazily, and her long calves were casually exposed. Her long silk-like hair hung unbound on both sides, dark and curly. She had a snow-white oval face without much makeup. Her lips were light and very beautiful, but there was a bright red mole at the corner of her mouth. The knurled gown complemented her snow-white skin. Her eyes were bright and slender, and the corners of her eyes were raised. Her curly hair fell to the side of her ears, and the corner of her mouth had a charming smile. The red gown made this laziness even more stunning. Although the gown was for men, because the person wearing it was too lazy to the bone, and the immortal aura was otherworldly, people could tell at a glance that it was a woman. At that moment, almost everyone sucked in a breath of air. Their eyes didn't turn as they stared at the fairy that appeared out of thin air. Their faces were filled with unprecedented surprise. That person seemed to not notice the gazes around her as she held the umbrella and casually looked at them. The Hellion Jower clenched her hands. She was naturally unhappy that such an uninvited guest stole everyone's attention. When she saw the face clearly, she was even more so. "Isn't this that village girl?" The maid blurted out, causing Madame Sue to look over. "What village girl?" Madame Sue looked at the figure in the distance and felt that it was strangely familiar. But when did such a young girl of the same age as her beloved daughter appear in the capital? Why didn't she know it all? Seeing that her miss didn't say anything, the maidservant said, it's the fairy that was talked about in the capital some time ago. Madame Sue was in the general's residence at that time, so she was naturally affected by this rumor. She had never taken this matter to heart before. After all, she had meticulously raised Zhao Er since she was a child. Whether it was the hair cream or the rouge, they were all made of ready-made pearls. She wanted her to grow up into a beauty that no one could compare to. How many times had she entered the palace? How many daughters had she seen? None of them were as outstanding as her Zhao Er. Naturally, she would not believe the rumors that were circulating in the alleyways. But now, it seemed that there really was something in the capital that she didn't know. Madame Sue wrinkled her eyebrows. She didn't like this feeling of being out of her control. But even so, she knew what to say in this matter so that her beloved daughter wouldn't be compared. Nowadays, these girls don't know the rules. With that kind of dress, where did they come from? It's a debate. In the future, when you see this kind of person, take the miss and stay away, do you understand? Although Madame Sue's mouth was scolding the servant girl, in fact, she wanted to express that the woman's origin was unknown. She didn't know where this seductive woman came from, but she couldn't even be compared to her family's Zhao Er. When the crowd heard this, they followed one after another, just don't know which ignorant person's soul has been seduced. It's still Zhao Er who looks. That person originally wanted to say good-looking, but felt that this statement was too hypocritical. Abruptly, she changed it to pure. Hellion Zhao Er's face was still smiling, but her heart had long since lost the good mood from before. She waited until there was no one else around before she pulled the servant girl over. She used some strength in her fingers and said, "You go and find out for me who that person is. How did he appear here? She's also wearing a robe that looks good." "Yes." The maidservant trembled as she responded. Not for anything else, but because of Hellion Zhao's twisted little face. No one had seen the true appearance of the most talented woman in the capital. Only she knew that no matter how cute a person was, when her expression was sinister, it was really frightening. "This servant will go and follow her." "Wait a moment." Hellion Zhao called her back, "Go and ask her what she does. If she's just a lowly wench in the red light district, then give her a sum of money and let her stay far away from the capital." Hellion Zhao had been surrounded by stars for a long time. She simply couldn't tolerate anyone who was prettier than her. Previously, when they met for the first time, Hellion Zhao didn't feel much threat because at that time, her dressing was so unsophisticated that it could drop dregs. She only relied on her good looks, skin, and figure. Right now, Hellion Zhao clearly and distinctly felt that in front of that person, she had fallen by a large step. No, she must make her disappear. Or, before she leaves, make her tell you the secret to whitening her skin. Hellion Zhao's eyes were filled with poison. Ask her what she eats on a daily basis. The maidservant cautiously asked, "What if she doesn't say?" "Then tell her who paid for it." Hellion Zhao raised her chin and laughed coldly. "It's very easy for the general's residence to make someone die quietly." The maidservant felt a chill run down her back and hurriedly responded, "Yes." Then she hurriedly chased in the direction Hellion Vivian had just left. It had to be said that Hellion Zhao was ruined by her own arrogance. If she hadn't looked down on Hellion Vivian before, she wouldn't have failed to recognize the umbrella in Hellion Vivian's hand. Because that wasn't an umbrella at all. Rather, it was the armament that Wei Wei won at Armament City at that time. However, in order to make it more practical, Hellion Vivian had made a few small adjustments later on, so that it had a function that no other armament had. Invisibility. As long as it reached the right temperature and wind direction. This umbrella could automatically create a false airflow, hiding Hellion Vivian, who was holding it. However, its external appearance hadn't changed much. That was why Hellion Zhao had been too careless, because in her heart, Hellion Vivian would always be the ugliest of the ugliest. Hellion Vivian had originally wanted to change her clothes first, then paint her face and go to the academy to find those two guys. She wanted to invite them out to watch the armament auction. In the end, just as she turned a corner, she discovered that there was still a small tail that she hadn't shaken off. Only, this small tail was clearly inferior to the previous person, and didn't even know how to hide his presence. Hellion Vivian turned sideways, and her ankles suddenly turned. Chapter 2:16. The surrounding wind seemed to have a sense of reality as it blew her hair. Her robes fluttered in the wind. Her beauty was peerless. The servant girl didn't expect her to suddenly turn around. She was startled at first, but then she straightened her back. She was clearly young, but she had learned her master's arrogance by 70 to 80%. Woman, isn't this the servant girl of that younger sister of yours who wants to frame you all day long? Why is she following you? Yuan Ming lazily smiled in the Xian Huan space. Hellion Vivian didn't speak. She held the umbrella in her hand, and the cherry blossoms fell. It was a beautiful scene. This made the servant girl feel very uncomfortable, but she didn't forget her young Miss's order. She took a step forward and said to Hellion Vivian, "Young Miss, which brothel do you belong to?" "Which brothel?" Hellion Vivian repeated this sentence, and a cold light flashed through her eyes. Unfortunately, the servant girl didn't realize it. Or it could be said that she was used to acting like a tyrant by Hellion Zhao's side. She didn't care about the flowers and plants outside, not to mention a prostitute who only had looks. "If you don't want to say, I won't force you." The servant girl put on airs. "I have a banknote worth 10,000 taels. My young miss said that as long as you tell us the secret of how to maintain your skin, this banknote will be yours." "Ah, so someone came to buy you." "Woman, I didn't expect you to be so popular." Yuan Ming smiled evilly at the side. Hellion Vivian glanced at the banknote, 10,000 taels. The servant girl thought that she had never seen so much money before. She continued to raise her chin, "That's right." But what she didn't expect was that the other party actually laughed lightly. That laughter seemed to have a little bit of playfulness. 10,000 taels is such a small amount of money. Your young miss can take it out. It's enough to buy a servant girl like you. You! The servant girl was angry. She thought that such a wild woman dared to challenge her, a head servant who came from the general's residence. She immediately sneered, "Do you know who I am? You really want to do this the hard way?" Hellion Weiwei casually glanced at her and allowed her to yell at her side, as if she simply didn't put her in her eyes. Compared to Hellion Vivian's faint smile, the maid's warning did not have any effect. Instead, it became unnecessary noise. When the maidservant saw this, she didn't care about anything else and scolded, "Do you really think you're so valuable? You're just a whore. I'm talking to you. Can't you hear me?" Hellion Vivian looked at her. Suddenly, she tilted her head and smiled. Then, there was a slap. A slap landed on his face. The maidservant was shocked and covered her face in disbelief. She was so angry that her face was distorted. She glared fiercely and screamed, "You dare to hit me, you dare to hit me. You bitch." "Paw." Hellion Vivian raised her hand again. Her smile was cold and charming. "So what if I hit you?" "You. I'm going to kill you." The maidservant completely lost her mind. She bared her fangs and brandished her claws at Hellion Vivian. She looked like she wouldn't give up until she beat her to death. Hellion Weiwei merely smiled. That gloomy and cold aura that she had been concealing started to emit without restraint. Her pair of bright and beautiful eyes were gradually dyed with frost. Suddenly, her finger moved like a dancing butterfly, drawing a curved line that cut through the air. Schwa! The sharp end was firmly pressed against the maidservant's neck. Her movements were so fast that the maidservant didn't have time to react. When she came back to her senses, there was a small cut on her neck. As long as I use a little bit of force, your artery will be cut open. Hellion Vivian held the umbrella in one hand and the silver knife against the maidservant's neck with the other. The wind blew and lifted her long hair. She smiled like a demon. When the time comes, it won't be as simple as your face hurting. Your blood will spurt out and get everywhere. Hey, do you want to try? You can say, bitch, again. I promise you will die a happy death. The maidservant no longer dared to clamor. Her legs had already begun to tremble, and her face was almost blood-red. Her entire body sank into extreme fear, and all of a sudden, she went limp on the ground. Hellion Wei Wei looked at her absent-mindedly, her slender fingers slowly tore the banknote into shreds. Go back and tell your family's young miss, this lord was born beautiful, even if she wanted to learn, she couldn't. As for the money, don't think that just because the Hellion Jiaoer is rich and powerful, she can do whatever she wants. Teach your maidservants well so that they don't get slapped in the face every day. The flying shredded paper fell. The maidservant watched as the beautiful figure walked further and further away. When her fingers touched the blood on her neck, she was scared out of her wits. She didn't expect this woman to be so powerful. Just now, she didn't even use martial qi, but she suppressed her to the point that she couldn't move at all. But as the Hellion Jiaoer's personal maidservant, she had martial qi and was about to cultivate to the fire level. But she couldn't even beat a person without martial qi. This woman, who is she? The maidservant's face was pale. She ran all the way through the long alley. Her fingers were covering her neck and she didn't dare to let go. Young Mississippi, Hellion Jiaoer turned her head and saw that it was her personal maid who was in this state. Her clothes were even stained with blood. While no one was paying attention, she hurriedly pulled her to the side and frowned. What's going on? The maidservant reported what happened just now to Hellion Jiaoer without missing a word. Her face was ferocious. This servant has never seen such an ungrateful woman. Hellion Jiaoer didn't say anything. She was so angry that her lungs were about to explode. She endured and endured, but in the end, she couldn't hold back anymore. She kicked the maidservant's heart hard. Useless thing. The maidservant was already injured. After being kicked like this, her whole body was lying on the ground. Her qi and blood were churning. The pain in her whole body was simply indescribable. However, no one would be able to see this scene. When Hellion Jiaoer turned around, she had already recovered her usual charming and innocent appearance. She walked into the crowd like a well-bred young lady with outstanding conduct. In her heart, there were no less than 100 thoughts of finding that slut and cutting her into pieces. Her eyes were filled with unconcealable jealousy. As a mother, naturally, Madame Su had long since seen these things. She sent someone to first drag that servant girl away, then walked over and patted Hellion Jiaoer's hand, saying, "How many times have I told you, nothing else is important. What's important is the results of this time's armament test. Why do you care about a country bumpkin? Just wait, in a moment, when the auction starts, these people will know that only you are worthy of being the center of attention." Chapter 217. Jiaoer understands everything mother said, but that little bitch is so arrogant. Hellion Jiaoer clenched both of her hands, a malevolent expression appeared on her face. Isn't it just a good-looking face? Just wait and see when I'll scratch up that slut's face. Su Yan Mo pulled her over, looked at her left and right, pinched her and said, "Jiaoer, how many times have I told you? You have to watch your words and actions. You are the most favored lady of the defense division, the apple of your father's eye. and the future master of the Eastern Palace. So many pairs of eyes are watching you, hoping to find the slightest mistake, even more so now. You have to remember, even if you are angry, don't show it in front of others, understand? Hellion Zhao Er also knew that her face didn't look too good, but she was still angry in her heart, yet she didn't dare to disobey her mother's words. She shook Madame Sue's arm and acted like a spoiled child as she stuck her face close to her. Daughter understands. Madame Sue stroked her beloved daughter's long hair, her eyes shining. You don't have to be so calculative about that person's appearance, isn't she just a village girl? Tomorrow, find a few people to find out her name and ruin her. Not just scratch her face, but ruin it. More ruthless than Hellion Zhao Er. Mother is right, I won't make a fuss. Hellion Zhao Er curved her thin lips, the corners of her mouth forming a vicious smile. She knew her mother's methods better than anyone else. If her mother said to ruin that person, there was no possibility of that person rising again. However, this pair of mother and daughter had never thought that, just like what Hellion Vivian said, money and power were not enough to cover the sky. There were always many variables in this world, and Hellion Vivian's real identity was the cause of many variables. The sky was clear, there were no clouds in sight, the wind blew gently, the emerald green pine and cypress supported the water droplets, the branches swaying. When the branches could no longer bear the weight of the water droplets, only then did they slightly press down on the branches. Snap, dew hit her face. At this time, Wei Wei had already changed her makeup and wore White Academy's uniform. She looked all around, yet didn't find the two people she was looking for. That was strange. Could it be that they were also on vacation? Hellion Vivian, who had returned without any success, didn't waste any more time on this. Seeing that no one was around, she simply walked out. Such an entry and exit made everyone's guess even more. Look, she actually came back. Coming back at this time, you must have forgotten something. It seems so. But some guys are really exaggerated. They call her boss the moment they see her. That's enough. It's just those people from the good compound who haven't seen the world and are blindly joining in the fun. Some people probably haven't tasted the feeling of being praised before, so they're doing this on purpose. It's as if they're showing off how powerful they are and how popular they are. Originally, when Wei Wei saw those little brothers that she'd accepted, she wanted to give out 2 of the seat tickets in her hand before stopping. Who knew that before they even started chatting, those young ladies from the big families who'd gathered together to practice martial chi saw her as an eyesore. They wholeheartedly thought that she was fighting for a position and looked down on her. After all, no matter how she thought about it, they were stronger than her. This woman's martial chi was indeed good, but what was the use of that? A bad family background was fatal. Furthermore, she didn't have the slightest bit of martial chi. Those people should be surrounding them. Why were they so blind as to surround a country bumpkin? Hellion Vivian understood that this was all caused by jealousy. She crossed her arms and looked at them with an evil smile. The person standing beside her was also a straightforward person. Chinny Feng, who was from the general's estate, spoke with a reckless spirit. Are you done? You're always chattering. Other than speaking ill of others, what else can you do? Just based on this point, you can't compare to boss. Yes, yes, yes. Your boss is an influential figure. One of them laughed mockingly. After all, there isn't anyone who can't even score a point in the martial chi class. Even the Hellion family couldn't help but kick her out of the family tree. Relying on her little martial chi attainments, she thinks that she's invincible. In the end, when the martial chi test came, she revealed her true colors. I don't understand. We're both from the general's estate, but Miss Zhao Er is very kind. Even when she went to Profound Heaven's auction, she didn't make a fuss. If your boss really has the ability, she should also go to the auction and stroll around. Sister, what are you saying? Aren't you making things difficult for our eldest miss? With all of her belongings, it's estimated that she can't buy a seat in the last row of the auction. You shouldn't make things difficult for a poor student. The ladies from the noble families talked back and forth, waving their fans at each other and mocking with fake smiles. You all shut up for me. The more Chinifeng listened, the angrier he got. He also studied martial arts. After he lost to Hellion Vivian, he was convinced. People like them who studied martial arts, in addition to talent, also paid attention to dexterity. Not everyone could learn martial arts, not to mention how difficult it was to sell those materials. And their boss was the most awesome. Even if ordinary materials, in her hands, could be turned into a top-notch martial art. These people with eyes at the top of their head simply didn't know what this meant for the martial arts world. They even ridiculed their boss for not having money. If their boss had money, the martial arts she made would definitely be sold like hotcakes. It can't be, young Master Qin, you want to fight with us for her. Someone sized up Chinifeng with a glance. I say, young Master Qin, you shouldn't have some shameful thoughts about your boss, right? For example, you want to marry your boss or something like that. After the words fell, another burst of laughter. Among them, a lady from an aristocratic family laughed until tears came out. She pointed at Chinifeng and Hellion Vivian and said, you don't say, their skin color is actually quite similar. I just don't know if in the future when they give birth to a child, it won't be a little black coal ball, right? Chinifeng exploded with a bang. He wanted to rush over and have a good fight. Hellion Vivian pressed down on his wrist. It seemed that she didn't use much strength, but it made Chinifeng turn his head in surprise. His eyes flashed with deep astonishment. He knew that although their boss's skill was good, she didn't have a foundation. It was said that when she had just entered the academy, she won that match. Because at that time, Hellion May's performance wasn't very good. Of course, he didn't know what was going on in that match. After all, what the match was really like, only the competitors themselves knew. But at that time in the crystal ball test, their boss clearly didn't even have the ability to ignite the crystal ball. But why did she just lightly put her hand on his arm? He felt a strength he had never felt before. This didn't seem like the strength of a person without martial qi. Chapter 218. Chinifeng looked at Hellion Vivian in disbelief. Hellion Vivian just smiled, with 30% evil charm and 70% playfulness. Her eyes met the ridicule of those rich young masters and young ladies. It turns out that the Profound Heavens auction location is so popular. Of course. Those people glanced at her arrogantly. Don't tell me you don't know what Profound Heavens is. Come to think of it, a person like you, I'm sure you haven't even seen Profound Heavens before. Chinifeng's eyes were red. Our boss really wants to see Profound Heavens armaments. Grandmaster Zizun's armaments are also top-notch. A country bumpkin is a country bumpkin, really can't communicate. That person held a handkerchief. I say sisters, let's not waste time here. Let's see if we can buy a seat in the back row through Miss Zhao Air. There's no need to think about the front row, it must have already been booked. These words are true. I heard that the auction won't start until tonight. Let's go ask for leave now and let Miss Zhao Air take us in, how about it? I think it's okay. A group of people laughed and talked, walking together in the direction of the superior compound. Even some of the people who were surrounding Hellion Wei just now also awkwardly changed sides at the last minute. This kind of phenomenon actually often appeared in modern times, forming cliques to squeeze people out. It was probably because they looked down on Hellion Vivian from the bottom of their hearts. Like those people said, she didn't have power and influence, so she was doomed to be criticized no matter what she did. But those people probably never thought that they would regret this decision so much in the near future. Hellion Vivian glanced at the people around her. In addition to Chenifeng, there were 2 girls and a boy. Among the 2 girls, one of them made Hellion Vivian raise her eyebrows. When she looked at her, there was a touch of light in her eyes. This is the childhood sweetheart that Zay, that guy, didn't dare to confess to. Nalan Hongye saw Hellion Vivian looking at her. She raised her eyes and was very forthright. What's wrong? Are you interested in coming with me? Hellion Wei Wei's words were interrogative, but she didn't give the other party the slightest chance to refuse. Her fingers grasped Nalan Hongye's wrist. She had to bring this along. She was the future young madam of the He family, so what if she took Zhang Weizai's world's tickets? In a moment, when they arrived at the shop, she would tell manager Zhang to put all the bills on He Zai. The more Hellion Vivian thought about it, the more she felt that it was a good idea. The smile on her face grew wider. Yes. Nalan Hongye had never seen such a woman before. Her smile only made people feel comfortable. She didn't have the subtle gaze that others looked at her. She had always done things like a man, and there were many old men in her family, so she had been raised as a man since she was young. To be honest, she really couldn't understand women. Alright, even though she was also a woman. But for example, when they were eating together, their conversation would always revolve around Hellion Vivian. She didn't want to participate in this kind of conversation. These people gradually alienated her. Bastard, she just wanted to be a beautiful girl who ate quietly. Was it so difficult? Also, those letters written to He Zai, could they always be sent to her? Being sent letters like this by so many girls would affect her marriage in the future. What's more, every time she told He Zai about this kind of thing, He Zai would only give her a cold laugh. He even said that if she sent such letters to the He residents again, she should never see him again. Then, when she didn't see him, he got angry and said that she had no conscience. He was already locked up, but she didn't know to send him food. Why did she always feel that He Zai was the same as those women? They were all like needles at the bottom of the sea, very difficult to find. One moment he was like this, the next moment he was like that. It really made her very puzzled. Hellion Vivian looked at Nalan Hongye's side face. She didn't think that this girl would leave with her so easily. She thought that the other party would more or less dislike her because of He Zai's actions. She didn't expect that. It was unexpectedly interesting. You're not going to ask me where I'm taking you? Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. Nalan Hongye's small face was handsome, expressionless. I'm familiar with Suzhou City. I can attest to this point. Chenifeng raised his hand at the side. The people she knows are all local tyrants. The armaments they make are also very powerful. It's just that I don't know why she was assigned to the good compound. Nalan Hongye turned her head to look at Chenifeng and asked in bewilderment, how do you know me so well? Chenifeng's face reddened. He lowered his head and didn't say anything. Hellion Vivian, however, understood. Especially when Nalan Hongye had a baby face that everyone loved. Her skin was so tender that it could drip water. She was also not spoiled. This kind of girl, if someone discovered her good points, they would be deeply in love with her. Only, she couldn't help but say that He Zai's move was good. It should be adjusted. Otherwise, if his sweetheart ran away with someone else, let's see how he would continue acting. He Zai didn't let me go to the good compound. He said that seeing me would make him upset. Nalan Hongye's eyes turned. It's probably my temperament that made him lose face. Who told me to not know how to judge people? Hellion Wei Wei paused. Her beautiful phoenix-shaped eyes looked up. She discovered that this girl wasn't as clueless as she appeared on the surface. She understood everything, so much so that she could see more clearly than anyone else. She just didn't want to participate. You can come to our inferior compound to play. I'm usually bored by myself. Hellion Wei Wei walked forward while chuckling as she looked at the girl in her hand. Apart from attending classes seriously, there's no other entertainment. Chinny Feng, Nalan Hongya, attending classes seriously, was it really appropriate for someone who slept all day to the point that even the teacher wanted to remove her name from the class? Right, boss, where are we going? Nalan Hongya didn't want to know, but they also wanted to know. After all, asking for leave was too extravagant for them. Hellion Vivian smiled faintly and said lightly, "We're also going to Profound Heavens." Another 2 hours passed. After the sunset, the show began. The streets were bustling with people coming and going, and there was an endless stream of horses and carriages. There were people who made sugar figures, sold rouge and powder, and fortune-telling people. The capital was originally the most prosperous capital of the Dragon War Empire. It was densely populated and luxurious. Now, the streets of Chang'an were even more crowded. Probably the most luxurious carriages in the capital were gathered in front of Profound Heavens, waiting to enter. Inside, there were also quite a few people wearing White Academy's uniform. From a distance, no matter how one looked at it, there were at least 6 or 7 people. There were both men and women surrounding Hellion Jiao Air's side, chatting and laughing, hoping that Hellion Jiao Air would lead them inside. Hellion Jiao Air couldn't not see their thoughts, but spending some money was nothing to her. What's more, these people's fathers were also useful in the imperial court. So Hellion Jiao Air didn't refuse at all. She was generous as if Profound Heavens was her family's. Chapter 219. Boss, are we really going there? Chinny Feng looked at the sea of people in the distance and was somewhat hesitant. It was not that he couldn't take out the money, but he was worried that someone would say something bad to attack his boss. Moreover, he heard that the seats in the Profound Heaven auction house were very popular. Some time ago, even his old man said that he would find a way to get one for him. He felt that his boss was powerful enough, there was no need to look at other people. Although the armaments of Profound Heaven were indeed good, but there was a suspicion of deliberately creating momentum. However, the boss of Profound Heaven was the first person in many years to create such momentum. He also heard the old man say something about brand effect. He didn't even understand what they were saying, but he knew that the other party was very powerful. Profound Heavens was the first person who could make the entire War Dragon Empire's people feel itchy, making people feel that having a martial art was equivalent to having a unique identity. That's why everyone fought to enter. Aside from the martial cultivators themselves, what they wanted was to display their nobility at this kind of time. If their boss went, wouldn't she be ridiculed by those people? The clever Hellion Vivian of course saw Chinny Feng's worry. She hooked her lips and smiled, "Don't worry, Profound Heaven is not as difficult to enter as you think." Chinny Feng grabbed his hair and couldn't express the helplessness in his heart. "Boss, this matter is not as simple as you think." But what he didn't expect was that there were people who agreed with such a statement. "Well, it's really not that difficult to enter." Nalan Hongye thought about it, then reached out and took out the silver card on her body. Her voice was faint. "Actually, I have 2 positions here." Hellion Vivian didn't need to think to know where her silver card came from. Someone couldn't help but make a move tomorrow. Heizei really hit it deep. Silver card. Chinny Feng looked a little dizzy. "You actually have a silver card of Profound Heaven. When did Nalan family have such a big power? Even the Defense Department didn't get a silver card." Nalan Hongya asked with a serious face, "Is it difficult to have this?" Heizei gave me 5 at once. But she only took 1 out. "No, it's not difficult at all." Hellion Vivian smiled faintly. However, it was a little too light of a punishment for someone who couldn't distinguish between public and private matters. She seemed to have thought of something and the corners of her lips curled up. Do you mind if we switch positions later? Nalan Hongye was very straightforward. I don't mind. Anyway, He Xiaoze has been locked up by the old man recently. He probably can't come out even if he wants to. Heh. In order to be able to watch an armament test alone with you, even if he had to crawl into a dog's kennel, he would still crawl out. However, Hellion Vivian smiled evilly. Disobedient employees always needed to be knocked and pinched, so that they would not often go crazy in the future and get close to her from time to time. Don't think that she's a fool. Just because she doesn't say it doesn't mean that she doesn't know. In the past, He-Eyes had wanted to make use of her and get close to her. It was probably because he had just entered the academy at that time, and didn't understand the various rules of the academy. In addition, there were too many girls in the academy, so it was inevitable that jealousy would arise from admiration. She reckoned that He-Eyes also wanted to find someone to divert these people's attention. Coincidentally or not, she became that gun handle. For example, that Chen Wenwan, because she obviously liked He-Eyes, she came to frame her. That's why it's said that a blue face is more deadly than a femme fatale. It was because of this that He-Eyes deliberately distanced himself from Nalan Hongye and turned around to get close to her. Hellion Vivian had long seen through this layer, but didn't say anything. Firstly, it was because she felt that the feelings of childhood sweethearts were more precious. Although she didn't really approve of He-Eyes' method, she couldn't deny that to some extent, it could indeed protect another person. Of course, she wasn't Mother Mary, sacrificing herself in order to protect someone. The main reason was that she was already standing on the cusp of the storm, so she didn't care if there was one more. Arguing with He-Eyes about this wasn't enough time to waste. Secondly, He-Eyes treated her pretty well. She wasn't an ungrateful person. Having this brother, she naturally stood on the same line. But, occasionally giving him a small punishment to let him know how powerful she was also necessary. Moreover, she really wanted to see what that playboy young Master He, who had never put anyone in his eyes, would look like when he was jealous. Nalan Hongye didn't know what Hellion Vivian was thinking. Chen Yifeng and the other two students didn't even catch their breath, and didn't even follow up with the conversation. It was obviously very difficult to get those silver cards, okay. Nalan Hongye even got 5 at once. That was practically better treatment than the royal family. Why does young Master He have so many silver cards? Chen Yifeng was impulsive and rash, but his brain wasn't stupid. Could it be that he has some kind of relationship with Profound Heaven's boss? Hellion Vivian glanced at him indifferently, smiling faintly. You can ask He-Eyes this question when you have the chance. It's almost time, let's go first. Chen Yifeng was still a bit dizzy, his head swelling as he followed Hellion Vivian and the rest into the crowd. Look who's here. Why is she here? Don't tell me that these people also came to the auction to watch the auction. The few students who had previously ridiculed Hellion Wei and the others in the academy looked at them with amused eyes, especially when they looked at Hellion Wei. Disdain was clearly written on their faces. Hellion Jiao also saw Hellion Vivian and the rest of the group. She frowned. Big sister. What is this bitch doing here? Big sister. When the surrounding madams heard Hellion Jiao's address, they all turned to look at Hellion Wei's direction. They only saw a young girl with a dark face standing there. The clothes on her body were also made of the most common materials. Looking left and right, there wasn't a single piece that was presentable. Sister Sue, this is your adopted eldest daughter. It's really better to see her than to hear about her 100 times. Look at her, hee. It had to be said that hee was an all-encompassing word, not only in modern times, but also in ancient times. Everyone knew that Su Yen Mo looked down on Hellion Vivian from the bottom of her heart. Chapter 220. However, sometimes, it was not good for a woman to be too capable. No matter how powerful the Hellion family was, in the end, she was still unable to protect herself in her old age. Her husband was snatched away, and the family property was taken away. Now, the one who called the shots was not the one from the Hellion family, but Su Yen Mo. Compared to that one, they preferred Su Yen Mo. She was a stubborn person, and always looked like a flower on a high mountain. She thought that she was great because she had fought a few battles, but when she returned to the capital, her reputation was still ruined by them. If they were to say, she was a stupid girl. Now, looking at her daughter's way of doing things, it was not much better. If she did not have any talents, she should just stay at home and not come out. She did not even see what kind of occasion it was today, and she still rushed to the front. The point was, did she think she could do it? Some of the ladies looked at Hellion Vivian arrogantly, as if they were looking at a clown. They thought that since they had not entered the scene yet, they might as well have some fun. I say, Wei Wei, your name is Wei Wei, right? How's your marriage going? Do you need us to introduce someone to you, so that your mother won't have to worry about you? Before Hellion Vivian could say anything, Su Yen Mo interrupted. It would be great if there is a suitable one. If this child does not have a husband for the rest of her life, I don't know how much my sister will hate me in the afterlife. Little sister Su, you're just too kind. Don't worry, I happen to have a pretty good one here. He just came back from the battlefield, but his legs are a little inconvenient. But Wei Wei, you should also understand that at your age, plus the previous incident, it's already good enough that someone can marry you back home. After saying that, that person sighed. Of course, it would also depend on whether the other side is willing to accept you. After all, you have no talents and no looks, it would be hard for me to explain to them. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. She was smiling from beginning to end, but that smile did not reach her eyes. That's too scary. Someone actually dares to introduce men to you. Yuan Ming rubbed his arms. Aren't they afraid that you'll beat the other party until half of their body is paralyzed? Moreover, with a missing leg, they probably won't even be able to do that. Woman, it seems that some people think that you're worthless and want to deal with you cheaply. Chen Yifeng's family had a general before, so he had heard a little about this person who had just returned from the battlefield. When he heard the madam's words, he frowned. Isn't that person already in his 50s? You want our boss to marry an old man in his 50s? What a rotten old man. That's a general with outstanding military service. The madam didn't like Chen Yifeng either. She glanced at Hellion Vivian and said, Wei Wei, it's not that I want to criticize you, but you're an unmarried girl. How can you hang around with men all day long? How can you be so rude to me? I'm your elder. Hellion Vivian laughed. She picked her ears with her fingers and said, I was wondering why the sound was so harsh to my ears. It turns out that it's because people have been barking non-stop. Also, Auntie, who are you? Am I close to you? You came up and said that you want to introduce a husband to me. Do you think you're so important? You. The madam was so angry that she kept hitting her own chest with her handkerchief. I've never seen such an ungrateful girl. Madame Su pretended to be red in the face. Sister, calm down. It's Wei Wei who doesn't know the rules and doesn't understand our good intentions. All these years, I've been scratching my head. Think about it, sister, you should know that it's not that I, Su Yen Mo, don't not care. It's just that I can't control her. As she said this, she let out a long sigh and looked like she was about to cry from being wronged. When the people around them heard these words, they started to point at Hellion Wei Wei one after another. When Madame Su saw this, she felt relieved. Thinking about the humiliation she had suffered in the hidden spirit temple this time, she had never suffered before. Now, she could finally vent her disgust. What she wanted to see was to let this little bastard be condemned by everyone. Other than revenge, of course, Madame Sue had other plans. The auction was about to start. She received news that the retired emperor would be coming. Last time, she heard from Jiao Air that this little bastard used them to curry favor with the retired emperor. That was why the retired emperor was so angry. Calculating the time, the retired emperor should be arriving by now. He was most likely sitting in the tea house opposite. The environment there was good and the view was good. If it wasn't for the high officials and nobles of the capital, it was impossible to book a seat there on this day. Su Yanmo's guess was right. There was indeed someone sitting in the tea house. The retired emperor, dressed in a Chinese brocade robe, sat in the most important seat. He held a purple jade teacup in his hand. Between his eyebrows, there were traces of power left behind by years of mingling in a high position. Although his eyebrows were smiling, it gave people a sense of oppression without being angry. On his left and right sat 4 men, all of them were handsome and had extraordinary manners. Of course, the most outstanding one was the third prince, dressed in a white robe and purple muslin. Beligaju. His elbows casually rested on the carved wooden chair, and his slender, white fingers lazily propped up the side of his face. His finely crafted white robe fluttered in the wind, and his ink-black hair fluttered, revealing his handsome face that was both good and evil. The light of the setting sun faintly shone on his body through the wooden window, outlining his perfect figure in varying shades of light. Sitting opposite him was the heir of the Murong Palace, Murong Chongfeng. Compared to Bailey Jiaju's coldness and indifference, his eyes were filled with appropriate gentleness, not too much, not too little, and not too much. He wore a brocade cloak with a navy blue cloud-embroidered robe. His eyes watched the scene below and he sneered. Now that woman should know how difficult it was for her to marry someone other than him. Although he didn't like to see anyone treat her like this, it was more important than anything that there was someone who could let her see this clearly. Eunuch's son, who was standing beside him, was not as magnanimous as Murong Chongfeng. Ever since he heard the words below, he wanted to go out and stop it, but the retired emperor had an attitude of wanting to listen. Therefore, no matter how anxious Eunuch's son was, he could only stand to the side and look at his master's faint smile. He thought of His Highness's face, but he was still wearing a mask. If he took off the mask, who knew how cold it would be? In this way, someone was going to be unlucky. Regardless of what Hellion Vivian meant to His Highness. But in front of His Highness, she was so brazenly introducing her husband to His Highness's favorite princess. Chapter 221. If Miss Sue really agreed, wouldn't His Highness? Eunuch's son glanced sideways and sized up Bailey Jiaju's expression. The people outside were still yelling, "I only proposed this marriage because I pity you. If General Wu didn't like your figure, who would want you based on your looks and style? You still have the cheek to come to the auction. Why don't you take out a mirror and look at your poor appearance, you uncontented little..." She didn't get to say the word bastard. Then she heard a bang. He was sent flying several meters away by a vicious kick. The madam only felt that her internal organs were in pain and there was a fishy taste in her mouth. She struggled on the ground, trying to get up. Hellion Wei Wei stood at the side, lifted her long leg and stepped on the back of her hand. Her eyes were filled with a cold light. She easily lifted the madam's other arm and pinched her throat. The corners of her mouth carried a smile, like a devil's. "That's why I said, it would have been fine if you had just stayed put. You just had to make me do it." One must know that the madam who came here was from a wealthy family. Hellion Vivian's kick was almost a challenge to the authority of the entire aristocratic circle. In an instant, everyone was like a grasshopper in a pot. One by one, they surrounded Hellion Vivian. Chen Yifeng looked at Hellion Vivian worriedly. He blocked left and right, trying to use his status to stop the soldiers from acting rashly. However, the people of Profound Heaven certainly wouldn't allow anyone to make trouble in their own territory. The shopkeepers outside also rushed over. The shopkeeper obviously knew Madame Su. Seeing her give him a look, he angrily waved his hand and said, "What's the matter? Is Profound Heaven a place for people like you? You troublemaker. Get out of here now. You don't even have a reservation ticket and you dare to come here and make trouble." Whoosh. Hellion Vivian narrowed her eyes coldly. Her fingers spread slightly and a glittering golden card appeared in her palm. There were only 2 words engraved on the front of the card, Profound Heaven. When the shopkeeper saw the golden card, his legs went soft and he almost knelt on the ground. Gold card. Profound Heavens only gave out 2 gold cards. Not because of anything else, but because Profound Heavens had 2 bosses. The gold card has been a symbol of their identity since they opened the shop. However, other than a few senior managers, no one had actually seen this golden card. How could it be in Hellion Vivian's hands? The shopkeeper's face turned pale and cold sweat appeared on his forehead. This is, say it again. Who are you telling to get lost? Hellion Vivian stared coldly at the middle-aged man who was shorter than her. The shopkeeper shuddered violently. Hellion Jiaoer couldn't stand it anymore. "Sister, how can you talk to the shopkeeper like that?" "Miss Jiaoer, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay. It doesn't matter what you say." The shopkeeper hurriedly waved his hand, sweating profusely as he stood there, repeating one sentence. The Hellion Jiaoer frowned. "Shopkeeper, my eldest sister doesn't know how to be polite. You can just take her away. Mother won't do anything. After all, she was the one at fault first." Take who? That was their boss. The shopkeeper's thoughts had been in a mess since the beginning. After hearing Hellion Jiaoer's suggestion, his face turned even uglier. He looked at Hellion Vivian, wishing he could find a hole to hide in. The situation was getting worse. Housekeeper Zhang, who was busy setting up in the building, heard the report and hurried over. He was stunned when he saw the figure that was surrounded. "You're finally here, Housekeeper Zhang." Su Yan Mo didn't look at Housekeeper Zhang's expression. She felt that it was about time for her to speak. She was only thinking about her own goal and smeared Hellion Vivian's reputation. "I can't control such a spoiled brat. She didn't even say a few words and she hit someone. She has no respect for the law." Housekeeper Zhang glanced at Hellion Vivian who was smiling faintly, then turned to Madame Su and said politely, "It's better to ask what's going on." Housekeeper Zhang. Su Yan Mo stood up straight and said with a hint of arrogance, "You don't have to give me face and let this brat go. She's no longer a member of the Defense Division. You can do whatever you want with her. The Defense Division can't afford to have such a vile creature. This has nothing to do with Madame Su." Housekeeper Zhang stood there politely with his hands folded in front of him. It was the standard standing posture of an old housekeeper. Those who knew him well would notice that there was respect in his politeness that had never been there before. Su Yan Mo enjoyed it very much. She thought that Housekeeper Zhang's respect was directed at her. She raised her chin even higher and said, "Housekeeper Zhang, I know that you think that this brat is my stepdaughter, so you can't do anything to her. There's no need at all. From today onwards, not only is she no longer related to the Hellion family, she can forget about entering the Defense Division." The old housekeeper didn't say anything and frowned. He didn't know how to tell Madame Su that he wasn't being courteous to her at all. In fact, the Defense Division had already been blacklisted by Wei Zhe World since the last time. He really couldn't understand where Madame Su's self-confidence came from. Mother, ask housekeeper Zhang to quickly get someone to take eldest sister away, so that she won't do anything that will damage the family's reputation. Helian Zhao was even more arrogant and directly ordered housekeeper Zhang around as if he was her servant. Upon hearing this, Helian Vivian sneered and kicked the person under her foot away with her long leg. She retracted her hand and slowly adjusted her collar. That indifferent attitude made her seem even more ruthless. Old Zhang, I didn't know that other than my words, you would listen to other people's orders. Her voice was neither loud nor soft. It echoed in the noisy street, but it was unusually cool and cold. Su Yanmo's fingers stiffened and a bad premonition suddenly surged in her heart. What did she mean by that? Everyone turned back to look. They saw housekeeper Zhang, who had always been calm and unapproachable, put his left hand on his right shoulder and said in a serious and respectful manner, "Boss, this old servant takes your salary. Other than your orders, no one else will and can't order this old servant around." Boss? Who was he calling? Very good. Helian Wei's lips curved into a smile as she paused between each word. I thought that my shop had been changed owners. Housekeeper Zhang looked at Su Yanmo and pointed out, no, it's just that some people have overstepped their boundaries. Su Yanmo's whole body trembled. Her eyes slowly widened. When she looked at Helian Wei again, it was as if her face had been slapped by someone. She could even hear the crisp sound of the slap. She felt extremely embarrassed in her heart. Even that originally arrogant smile also froze at the corner of her mouth. Not only her, but even Helian Zhao and the students who wanted to curry favor with Helian Zhao to enter the auction, as well as many madams from famous families, were all stunned. Chapter 222. Wow! There was an unprecedented uproar on the street. The extremely mysterious boss of Profound Heavens, who even the imperial family had never seen before, was Helian Vivian. How was this possible? Even Eunuch's son, who was standing on the second floor, exclaimed and turned to look at His Highness. Bailey Jiaju supported the side of his face with one hand and played with the teacup in the palm of his hand with the other. The small teacup turned back and forth between his fingertips. Just as it was about to fall, it fell between his other fingers. At this time, he was looking at Helian Vivian. His long and narrow eyes flashed with a stronger appreciation than before. But in the next moment, that appreciation turned into an iceberg when he remembered the name of this martial arts company. Profound Heavens, just by hearing these 4 words, he knew what it meant. She really hid it from him. Did she like it that much? So much that she couldn't wait to use their names to become famous. Beligaju's face turned cold. His fingers clasped the teacup so hard that he didn't even realize it himself. The retired emperor was shocked because the reason why the imperial family's fighting strength had become stronger recently was because of Profound Heaven's armaments. Only Profound Heavens could supply such a large amount of armaments, and the price was also the cheapest. This was very important for the development of a battle team. So even the retired emperor had always wanted to find an opportunity to meet this legendary martial arts master. He didn't expect that it would be this girl. Downstairs, Chen Yifeng was even more stupefied. He stared blankly at Helian Vivian. Boss, are you really the boss of Profound Heavens? Yes, I am. Helian Vivian smiled lightly. Chen Yifeng still felt like he was dreaming. But aren't you usually in the academy? How do you have time to do this? During class, I'm always doing martial arts. Helian Vivian's voice faintly interrupted him. Chen Yifeng stared blankly for a moment. Then, he laughed out loud and said in a clear voice, so it turns out that you were practicing martial arts, not sleeping. Boss, you deceived everyone. Mainly sleeping, and occasionally doing martial arts. Chen Yifeng was speechless. Hellion Vivian patted him on the shoulder and then looked into Steward Zhang's eyes. She glanced at the shopkeeper who was still sweating and said, "Dismiss them and tell them that Profound Heavens is just Profound Heavens. It has nothing to do with any family. If anyone has anything to do with it, they should get lost." The last 3 words made the shopkeeper fall to the ground in an instant. Hellion Zhao opened her mouth, wanting to say something. Hellion Vivian then turned her head, her eyes sweeping over them inch by inch, her long sleeves fluttering in the wind. "Old Zhang, according to the rules of Profound Heavens, those without a silver card, no matter who they are not allowed to enter the auction. Pass down the order. These people, in the future, in Profound Heavens, no matter how much money they take out, they will not be able to get a single armament." Boom! Those who originally thought that they would definitely be able to enter were completely dumbfounded, especially those students from the White Academy. They were so regretful that even their intestines turned green. Their fingers lightly clenched, and their faces were ashen. Seeing this scene, Chen Yifeng was very excited. He knew that he was right to recognize this boss. Every time, just when people thought that Hellion Vivian was only so-so and could be trampled on by others, in the next moment, she would use an unexpected way to slap those people in the face. Her arrogant posture, handsome and shocking. "Hellion Vivian, don't you think that you are too self-righteous? You just made a single armament, and you dare to say such harsh words to us." The students were all spoiled since childhood. Where would they be able to endure such anger? They arrogantly shouted, "Believe it or not, my father can shut down Profound Heavens with just a word." Hellion Vivian glanced sideways, with a bloodthirsty smile. She did not look at them, but asked Steward Zhang, "Who is his father?" "Minister Li from the Ministry of Appointments." Steward Zhang took a look and immediately knew who it was. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. "Minister Li, who is in charge of purchasing armaments for the Imperial Court. How about it? Now you know how to be afraid." The student raised his chin. "Most of the armaments in Profound Heavens are bought by my father." Hellion Vivian raised her eyes, and her smile became wider. "Pass down the order. Stop all the armaments supplied to the Li family. If the Imperial Court sends someone to ask, just say that we are not happy with this business and will not do it." "Yes." Steward Zhang lowered his eyes. The student's expression stiffened. "Hellion Vivian, don't be too arrogant. Without the Li family, I would like to see how you can open your armaments business." Hellion Vivian sneered, "Noisy. Old Zhang, take him away and beat him." "How dare you!" As soon as the student raised his head, Hellion Vivian gave him a kick. She stepped on his back valiantly, moved her fingers, and took the wooden chair next to her. She stepped on him with cold eyes. "Why wouldn't I dare?" Puff! After being kicked and stepped on like this, the student surnamed Li spat out a mouthful of blood. His appearance was extremely bleak. The scalps of the crowd were numb, and they took a step back in fear. Hellion Vivian just took out a handkerchief and gently wiped the blood stains on her fingertips. She was like a flower that bloomed in hell, enchanting and bloodthirsty. "I, Hellion Vivian, don't have other hobbies, but I like to slap people's faces. Do you think that I won't do it just because you are the young master of the Li family? Today, I, Hellion Vivian, will say one thing. No matter what your identity is, no matter how much money you have, don't think that you can escape unscathed after scolding me." After saying this, Hellion Vivian glanced sideways. "Who else scolded me just now?" "Old Zhang, beat them all until they admit defeat." Everyone stepped back in horror and watched as 2 or 3 people from Profound Heavens were pinned to the ground by the people from Profound Heavens and slapped twice on their faces. Such a bloody way of doing things had firmly intimidated many people. Hellion Zhao was angry and wanted to go over. Su Yan Mo held her hand and gestured for her to look at the tea house next to them. Hellion Zhao only then noticed that among the group of people standing opposite, there was a chess piece that her father had buried in the palace. So, the retired emperor was here too. Hellion Zhao understood her mother's meaning and let Hellion Vivian do as she pleased until she finally lost her life. She did not believe that the retired emperor would have any good impression of such a despicable person. Later, he would definitely send someone to punish this little bastard. This was also the reason why the student from the academy shouted with a swollen face, "Hellion Wei Wei, if you have the guts, why don't you step on me like this? When my father comes, you'll die a horrible death." Hellion Vivian sneered and pinched the student's chin with her fingers. "You should ask your father first, how did he negotiate with profound heavens?" Chapter 223. Whether this deal succeeds or not, it's not up to your father, but up to me, Hellion Vivian. Originally, I was still considering whether to accept this deal, but now that I hear you say this, I won't accept it. Seeing this, the retired emperor couldn't sit still. The reason why he specially sent someone to discuss this deal was because he wanted Profound Heavens to only provide a large number of martial cultivators to the imperial family. Now, the retired emperor stood up in anger, his eyes deeply looking at the corner of the second floor, his voice carrying the oppressive feeling of wind and rain. "I didn't expect Ministerly to have such a competitive and loving son." Just this sentence alone made Li Lai, who was accompanying the officials, so scared that his forehead overflowed with sweat. He wanted to reach out and wipe it away, but he didn't dare to move. The retired emperor continued, "Your desire to win has already reached the point of lawlessness. Using the authority given by this emperor to threaten martial cultivators? This emperor wants to ask, who gave you this authority?" As the last sentence left his mouth, the teacup in his hand was also ruthlessly thrown out, smashing into the side of the Li family official. A loud crash sounded. That person surnamed Li immediately bent his legs and knelt on the ground with a bang. His forehead couldn't help but kowtow. "Retired Emperor, please spare me, retired Emperor, please spare me." This official didn't teach his son well, which is why he has such an arrogant and willful temperament. "Don't tell this emperor, you go down now and apologize to Hellion Vivian until she is satisfied." The official with the surname Li kept saying yes, and then followed Eunuch's son out of the tea house. Murong Chang Feng was somewhat absent-minded, even when the tea stained his fingers, he didn't notice. He just looked at Hellion Vivian sitting in the middle, his chest churning. That kind of emotion came inexplicably. Murong Chang Feng couldn't tell if it was regret, annoyance, or anger. She was actually this powerful. When did this happen? Why didn't she tell him? Didn't that person think of him first no matter what happened? However, right now, Wei Wei was only motionless in all 8 directions. She sat there lazily like a spoiled brat, looking like she was about to start a massacre. "Hellion Vivian, aren't you afraid that your actions will reach the ears of the retired emperor?" Young Master Li, who was being stepped on by her, still attempted to use the retired emperor's authority to intimidate her. However, Hellion Vivian strongly disagreed, then, let it reach the ears of the retired emperor. Unexpectedly, as soon as she finished speaking, Eunuch's son and Lord Li from the Ministry of Appointments walked over. When Madame Su saw this, the corners of her mouth curled up. It was finally here. Although the process was out of her control, the result was still the same. The Emperor Emeritus finally couldn't stand Hellion Vivian and sent someone down. Young Master Li had the same thought as Madame Su. Seeing his father appear, he shouted before he even got close, "Father, you have to teach this damn woman a lesson. No matter what, our Li family represents the retired emperor. How dare she?" Slap. Before the young master of the Li family could finish his words, he was slapped by Lord Li, causing him to become dizzy. "Father." Young Master Li covered his bruised and swollen face. He was completely dumbfounded. Why did his father hit him? Lord Lee looked at Hellion Vivian ingratiatingly. Boss Wei, look, this is all my son's fault. Please don't take it to heart, don't take it to heart. Lord Lee, Hellion Vivian crossed her legs, looking very cool like a queen. You're too polite. Young Master Lee just said that you're rich and overbearing and look down on profound heaven's armaments. Whether you buy or not depends on your mood. The fall in her heart was indescribable. Originally, she was the one who was in the limelight today, and it was easy for her to enter profound heaven. Besides, she couldn't think of anyone else who could win those armaments. But now, she was reduced to the point of being driven away. Chapter 224. Mother. Hellion Jiao was anxious. Not only were there madams from the capital here, but there were also students from the same academy as her. If she was really chased away like this, where would she put her face in the future? Mother, we can't go. I don't believe that with my current status, I can't even get into a small auction house. I won't go. Hearing this, Hellion Vivian sneered. Old Zhang, did you hear that? I heard. Manager Zhang's gaze was slightly cold as he looked at Hellion Jiao. He really admired this genius who was known as the capital's #1 beauty. When other people tried to chase her away, she still refused to leave. How thick was her skin? Hellion Vivian's eyes turned cold. Then why haven't you beaten me yet? Pang! The sound of the swift and fierce staff rang in the air. Everyone was suddenly shocked. Looking at the masked knights, they were shocked and frightened. That was a new mercenary group that recently rose up had tailor-made martial arts that others didn't have. They came and went mysteriously, their whereabouts were a mystery, and their commission fee was frighteningly high. They didn't accept commissions easily. Could it be that even this mercenary group was Hellion Vivian's? Everyone's eyes shook, and they wanted to retreat in fear. Hellion Jiao refused to accept this and wanted to raise her martial chi, but Madame Su held her hand. Jiao. Stop. Mother, are you going to let this go? Hellion Jiao sneered. What mysterious mercenary group? Even if there were 10 of them working under that trash, they wouldn't be able to beat me. Madame Su saw that she couldn't persuade her and her tone became angry. She pointed her finger at her head. How can you be as stupid as your third sister? Think about it, what will the world say about you if you fight? Just because someone didn't let you in, you shamelessly insisted on entering. Mother, I... Hellion Jiao's eyes reddened as teardrops followed and fell down. However, she was full of hatred. I really can't take this lying down. When Madame Su saw her beloved daughter like this, she felt her face burn even hotter and her heart hurt even more. However, she had to endure it and quickly dragged the Hellion Jiao forward. This was the first time that she had been chased out of the trading company in such a manner, and yet she had to endure it without any temper. This was all because of Hellion Vivian. That little bastard. Sooner or later, she would personally skin her alive. Who allowed you to leave? A cold voice sounded beside his ear. Before Su Yan Mo could react, she saw a flash before her eyes. Hellion Vivian was already standing in front of her. She effortlessly stood in front of them, her long hair swaying slightly. Su Yan Mo did not have an ounce of martial chi in her body. It was precisely because she did not have martial chi that she had set her sights on the Hellion bloodline before marrying into the defense division. Why was it that her daughter did not know anything, while that bitch's daughter was born a genius? She was not convinced, so she simply used that bitch's blood to refine pills and carefully raised her daughter. That was how Hellion Jiao achieved her current status. When Hellion Vivian stood in front of her, she actually felt that the bitch had come alive and was here to take her life. Su Yan Mo could not help but shudder. Hellion Jiao shouted angrily, Hellion Vivian, don't you go too far. You came to my territory and caused trouble, but you didn't even apologize. Who is the one who is going too far? Hellion Vivian sneered. Hellion Zhao remembered her mother's instructions and endured. Big sister, I never wanted to fight with you to this extent. Is that so? Hellion Vivian curled her lips and said evilly, that's not what you said just now. Hellion Zhao bit her lip tightly, I didn't know better just now. What did you say? Louder. Hellion Vivian reached out and dug her ears. Hellion Zhao clenched her hands tightly and took a deep breath, I didn't know better just now. If you don't know any better, then let Madame Su teach you well. Don't always get used to snatching other people's things and think that everything in the world belongs to you. Hellion Wei Wei said a few words. Su Yanmo's smile froze on her face. Looking at the gazes directed at them from all around, Su Yanmo could not bear to stay any longer. She pulled Hellion Zhao into the sedan chair. Those relatives who wanted to enter the auction by relying on Su Yanmo saw that Su Yanmo had left and quickly looked at Hellion Vivian. I told you Wei Wei is capable. Yes, yes. Someone followed and looked at Hellion Vivian ingratiatingly, Wei Wei, your second aunt and I have never said anything about you. Hellion Vivian turned around with a smile, you didn't say anything about me just now. Then look, your second aunt and I are already here, the location of the auction. That person continued to smile. Hellion Vivian looked up and said slowly, but you seem to have forgotten that you joined forces to banish me from the clan. That person's face turned pale, then this matter, we were not willing to do that. After all, it was the 4 elders who made the decision. The woman standing at the side tried her best to explain. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows, you were not willing. If you were not willing, would you have mocked me when I was out of the clan? We. The 2 madams still wanted to say something. Hellion Vivian did not waste any more time and said coldly, make them leave. Yes. Steward Zhang reached out and stopped them. The 2 madams looked like they were struck by lightning. Their expressions were stiff as they were blocked outside the door. Their faces showed deep resentment and jealousy because they could not get what they wanted. Eunuch Sun followed beside Hellion Vivian and said politely with a smile, Miss, this old servant is here to pass a message to the retired emperor. It is not convenient for him to appear, so he sent this old servant. I hope you don't mind. Eunuch Sun, what are you saying? Hellion Vivian smiled and returned to her usual politeness, I know what Eunuch Sun wants to say. I will trouble Eunuch Sun to pass the message. As long as there is a lot of money, Profound Heavens will do well for the retired emperor's martial practice. The horsetail whisk in Eunuch Sun's hand sank, then this old servant will take his leave. I wish Miss a perfect ending to this auction. Thank you for your auspicious words. Hellion Vivian smiled and ordered the servant beside her, send Eunuch Sun out. Yes. After Eunuch Sun left. Chenifang then said with a worried face, Boss, today's matter is satisfying, but you may not have a smooth journey in the future. Those people from the general's residence will definitely not let you go so easily. Today, Eunuch Sun was here, so they didn't make a move. When you make the retired emperor's martial arts, they won't be so afraid. After all, you don't have a backer, and there are also the Li family and the Wu family. They are all from the 4 great families. If you offend them, I'm afraid it will be very difficult for you to walk in the capital in the future. I'm afraid something will happen. How about I stay by your side to protect you these few days? Chapter 225. No need. Hellion Wei Wei moved her wrist and casually smiled, I can handle it myself. Don't worry, the auction is about to start. You guys can go to the seats that I have reserved and sit down. I still have some things to take care of. Chenifeng still felt uneasy, but Steward Zhang had already politely led them to another place. In the tea house, Eunuch's son reported Hellion Vivian's words to the retired emperor. The retired emperor sat back in his seat and looked at the trembling official Li. He was not in the mood to watch the auction anymore. He just waved his hand and left the rest to Beligaju. Then, he returned to the palace with his guards. Official Li breathed a sigh of relief. He thought that since the retired emperor did not ask about it today, this matter would be over. However, he had forgotten that if it was His Highness who took action, there would only be two situations. The first was that His Highness was completely uninterested. In that case, he would have to congratulate Lord Li's ancestors for being able to live in peace. The second situation was that His Highness was very interested. In that case, he would still have to congratulate Lord Li, because there really weren't many things that His Highness was interested in. In the end, he would send people directly to accompany their ancestors. Sure enough, as soon as Eunuch's son thought about it, Beligaju's cold and noble voice sounded. Take off your hair plume and clean it up. Don't get blood everywhere. It's very dirty. Yes. Aning was like a ghost. Official Li and his son did not even have a chance to speak before they were dragged out of the tea house. The rest of the officials saw this and their scalps went numb. They immediately restrained their hands and feet. Beligaju just sat on the main seat and looked up. There's also the Wu family. The Wu family. Some people were puzzled and whispered. The Wu family did not even say anything. How did they offend the royal family? Beligaju chuckled coldly. How did he break his leg? I think you all know better than I do. He didn't know how to be honest in the barracks. After leaving the barracks, he still wants to take in concubines. Since he is so easy to make mistakes on this issue, then let him know his place. Cut off that thing of his and throw him into the dungeon. Eunuch's son was speechless. He thought that the marriage proposal was over, but it turned out that His Highness was waiting here. The others also felt that this matter was a bit strange. In the past, when the retired emperor came, he never asked anyone to accompany him. It was only this year that the Murong family, the Yuan family, and their subordinates, the Li family and the Wu family all received the order to accompany them at the last minute. Now that he thought about it, he had a feeling that they had set up a trap long ago and were just waiting for them to fall into it. However, the retired emperor shouldn't have used this kind of method. If he wanted to take someone, under normal circumstances, he would directly take that person with a knife. Why would he use such a silent and incomparably sinister method? Who was the mastermind behind this? The remaining Murong Changfeng and the Yuan family's young master were all puzzled. They only felt a wave of uneasiness in their hearts. And Beligaju only held his teacup from beginning to end. His slender fingers supported his chin, looking indifferent and noble. Eunuch's son glanced at his master again. Speaking of which, the people who had fallen into the water this time seemed to be the people who had ridiculed eldest miss at White Academy. No, it couldn't be. Could it be that His Highness was angry because of a beauty? Eunuch's son choked on his own thoughts and kept coughing at the side. This word really didn't suit His Highness. Moreover, wasn't this anger a bit too late? Eunuch's son's face was full of doubt as he stared at Beligaju without blinking. Beligaju raised his eyebrows and said in a light tone, if you want to cut the weeds and dig up the roots, of course you need time. Eunuch's son really was angry because of a beauty. Then His Highness and eldest miss, not waiting for him to open his mouth, Bailey Jia Ju already stood up, narrowed his pair of peach blossom eyes, the bottom of his eyes flashing as he walked to a dark corner, and ordered Shadow, go check which seat she's sitting in. Yes. Shadow's figure flashed and entered the auction house. Night slowly descended. The auction officially began. However, the Hay family's second young master, who planned to have a date with Mei Mei, was stunned when he saw the person next to him. "Why is it you? Why can't it be me?" Helene Vivian shook the wine cup in her hand and laughed lightly, "And, this is really a good place. It's really suitable for two people to talk about love." He Zhe wrinkled his thick eyebrows and felt that there was a problem that needed to be explained, Wei Wei, listen to me. Although I admire you, I don't have that kind of feeling towards you. Helene Vivian's smile froze, as if she was greatly hurt. "Then why did you say that you want to marry me into the Hay family?" "That's because..." He Zhe grabbed his long hair and suddenly had a kind of remorse of eating his own bitter fruit. He finally managed to crawl out from under the old man's nose today just to spend some time with that stupid woman who didn't get it. How did he end up meeting Wei Wei? Also, she shouldn't have taken a fancy to him before, right? How come today? Could it be that the hint he gave before was really too obvious? He Zhe's heart was full of regret, but he was afraid that directly saying it would hurt Helene Vivian's face. After scratching for a long time, he still couldn't come up with a reason. Helene Vivian simply used her trump card. She buried her head to one side and her voice trembled slightly. It sounded like she was crying. "So you've been lying to me all this time. What a waste of my sincerity towards you." He Zhe was stupefied. He'd known Helene Vivian for so long and had only seen her valiant and handsome. When had he ever seen her cry? I. He Zhe sat down dispiritedly. His fingers stroked Helene Vivian's hair. "I'm a scoundrel." He originally wanted to confess and be lenient. Who knew that this scene in the eyes of the people who became two lovers who had just finished quarreling and were about to reconcile and warm. Eunuch's son's heart thumped loudly and subconsciously turned his head. Beligaju's silver mask looked colder than ever before. He faintly wrinkled his willowy eyebrows. His 10 ivory-like fingers tightly clasped the bag of armament parts that he'd just brought over to give to Helene Vivian. His beautiful and sharp white teeth were slightly exposed. No matter how he tried, it couldn't conceal that heaven-destroying and earth-exterminating coldness. At this moment, the aura around his body was no longer indifferent. Instead, it contained a hidden chill. Even his smile was so cold that it made people's whole body tremble. Separated by the noisy crowd, Beligaju looked at the prey that should have been his, telling the truth to another man. It was just that one sentence that made Beligaju's chest tremble. It spread to him, and even he couldn't understand it. His martial chi is going to disappear again. So what? Perhaps, after his prey and her beloved reconcile, she won't think about the contract between them anymore. Then, she'll think about how to tell him about this matter, and then run away like last time. This series of conjectures reminded Beligaju again and again, the prey he had set his eyes on didn't belong to him.